Ben Harper sat at his desk, staring out the window of the dealership's small office. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in mid-October. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of overcast day that made everything feel a bit dreary. Ben had been managing the dealership for 2 years now, and while the job had its ups and downs, today was shaping up to be yet another uneventful day. He sighed, ran a hand through his dark hair, and tried to push away the nagging thought that his career was stagnating. The showroom floor below was bustling with activity. The salespeople were doing their usual thing, chatting with customers, pitching cars, walking people through financing options. From his vantage point above, Ben could see everything unfold in the open space, and he felt a sense of control. He had worked hard to climb up the ranks, proving himself as the kind of manager who could keep things running smoothly. Sure, his ambitions were bigger than just this dealership, but for now, it was enough. Or so he told himself. He picked up the phone to check in with his team. The conversation was brief, a few updates here and there. Then, just as he was about to hang up, the front door swung open, and a figure walked in, shaking off the rain. Ben didn't think much of it at first. Another potential customer, probably just looking around, like the dozens of others who had come and gone. He went back to his paperwork. But then, the man stepped forward and caught his attention. "Excuse me, sir," the stranger said in a gravelly voice that had an unmistakable edge to it. "I'm looking for a new car." Ben glanced up, then did a double take. The man standing before him was, without a doubt, someone he recognized. But he couldn't quite place him. The figure was dressed simply, denim jacket, gray jeans, and boots. His hair was mostly gray now, but the sharp lines of his face, the steely blue eyes, and the air of quiet authority screamed celebrity. Clint Eastwood. Ben's stomach churned. He didn't know whether to laugh or to panic. He had seen Clint Eastwood in movies countless times, admired the man for his legendary status in Hollywood. But what was he doing here, at this small-town car dealership? Get it together, Ben. He's just another customer. Don't freak out. "Hi, welcome," Ben said, plastering a smile on his face. "What kind of car are you looking for today?" Clint didn't respond immediately, but instead gave Ben a knowing smile, almost like he had seen this all before. "Something practical. I'm not too picky." Ben nodded, still trying to keep his composure. "We've got some great sedans and trucks in the back. Let me know what kind of features you're interested in, and I can show you a few models." Clint's eyes swept over the showroom floor as if evaluating more than just the cars. He seemed detached from the frenzy of the place, calm and unbothered by the busy salespeople darting around. Ben wasn't sure if it was the man's legendary status or his presence in the dealership that was making everything feel just a bit more surreal, but he pushed it aside and led Clint toward the back where the newest models were displayed. As they walked, Ben couldn't help but steal glances at Clint, who seemed totally at ease despite being in a room full of people who would probably recognize him in an instant if they bothered to look up. The thought crossed Ben's mind that maybe Clint didn't want to be recognized, didn't want the fuss. Still, he couldn't stop the tiny bit of excitement bubbling inside of him. After all, it wasn't every day that you were standing next to a Hollywood legend. "How's your day been so far?" Ben asked, trying to make small talk as they moved along. Clint gave a brief chuckle. "Same as usual. Looking for something new. And maybe a little quieter." Ben smiled, trying to hide his nerves. "I get it. Sometimes you need a break from the spotlight." Clint just nodded, his expression unreadable. Ben led him to the row of sleek sedans, giving him the usual spiel about fuel efficiency, safety features, and the like. But Clint wasn't biting. He just seemed distracted, his eyes flicking from one car to the next, not really focused. "Can I ask," Ben ventured, "what brings you to this dealership of all places? I mean, we're a small operation here." Clint paused and turned his head slightly. His gaze was still calculating, but there was a faint glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Just looking for something a bit more low-key," Clint replied. "Maybe I'll find what I need here." Ben nodded, though he wasn't sure what Clint's words meant. It was almost like the man was a mystery in and of himself, but he couldn't quite figure out what the puzzle was. He wanted to ask more, maybe even talk to him about movies or something, but he forced himself to stay focused. This was a job, after all. He had to treat Clint like any other customer. But as they made their way through the selection, Ben felt increasingly uneasy. Something about Clint Eastwood, the real Clint Eastwood, standing here, so close to him, just felt wrong. Maybe it was because Ben was used to seeing him on the big screen, larger than life, not standing in front of a used car lot with a quiet demeanor. But that was exactly the point. Clint was just another customer, right? Anything catching your eye? Ben asked, trying to shake off the feeling that he was somehow messing this up. Clint glanced at him, and then at the cars. Not yet, he said with a shrug. Ben took a deep breath. All right. Well, if you need any help, just let me know. A moment of silence passed between them before Clint spoke again, his voice even more gravelly than before. Actually, I think I'll come back another time, he said, turning to head toward the front of the dealership. Ben watched as Clint walked out of the building, a strange sense of disappointment bubbling in his chest. It was silly, he knew, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just let an opportunity slip through his fingers. Like meeting a legend was something you couldn't afford to mess up. It wasn't until Clint had disappeared out the door that Ben's heart dropped. Wait, Ben muttered. But by then it was too late. Just as he was about to head back to his desk, a young salesperson rushed over, looking panicked. Ben, do you know who that was? She asked, eyes wide. Ben furrowed his brow. Who? Clint Eastwood, she said, almost breathlessly. Ben blinked, his mind racing. What do you mean, Clint Eastwood? The salesperson gestured toward the door. That man you just kicked out? He's the Clint Eastwood. Ben stood frozen for a moment. The weight of the realization crashed down on him like a freight train. Oh no, he muttered. And with that, the first domino had fallen. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Ben stood at the front of the dealership, staring out into the gray morning, still in shock. His heart raced as he replayed the encounter over and over in his head. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. He had kicked him out, dismissed him as just another customer. The moment was so surreal, Ben could hardly believe it himself. For a moment, everything felt muffled, as if the world had slowed down around him. His employees, who had been buzzing with activity just moments ago, now appeared like distant figures, moving in slow motion. The young salesperson, Emily, who had just confirmed Clint's identity, stood next to him, her face a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. Ben, do you realize what just happened? Emily's voice broke through his haze, but the words felt as if they were coming from far away. Ben blinked and forced himself to focus. He turned toward her and nodded, his face flushed with humiliation. Yeah, I realize. I just kicked out Clint Eastwood. Emily's eyes widened. I don't think you quite understand what that means. He's a legend. And you? I know, Ben cut her off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I didn't know it was him. I thought he was just another guy trying to haggle for a deal. The dealership's other employees had started to gather around, their curiosity piqued. They had overheard the conversation and, like Emily, couldn't believe what they were hearing. Some of them shot Ben disapproving looks, while others seemed too stunned to speak. I think we all know that no one just walks into a dealership and talks like Clint Eastwood, Emily continued, her voice tinged with exasperation. I'm not sure who you thought it was, but this could be a huge problem. Ben swallowed hard, looking back toward the door. Clint had already left. There was no way to apologize, no way to take back the words that had sent the man out into the rain. The more he thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. How could he not recognize one of the most famous men in Hollywood history? What kind of fool was he? His mind was racing as he replayed the encounter. Clint hadn't been flashy or demanding. He hadn't even been interested in the usual sales pitch that Ben had grown so accustomed to delivering. He'd been calm, almost detached, but in retrospect, there had been something in Clint's gaze that Ben had missed, a quiet authority that should have tipped him off. Ben glanced around the showroom, seeing the way his employees were looking at him now. He knew they were probably wondering how he'd managed to fix this mess. Some might even be whispering that he was an idiot for missing the opportunity of a lifetime. It wasn't like he hadn't met famous people before. He'd once spoken to a well-known TV star at a corporate event. But Clint Eastwood? He was different. This wasn't just about celebrity. This was Clint freaking Eastwood, a man who had shaped cinema for decades, whose name alone commanded respect. Ben took a deep breath, trying to push aside the growing panic. "All right," he said, his voice louder than it should have been, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Let's just focus on getting back to work. There's nothing we can do about it now, but we can still make today a good day. We have cars to sell, and we have customers to help. Let's move forward." The staff exchanged uncertain glances, but nodded reluctantly. Emily gave Ben a sympathetic look, then went back to her duties. The others followed suit, though Ben could tell they were still whispering among themselves, exchanging comments he couldn't hear. He could feel the eyes on him, every step he took, but Ben wasn't sure what to do next. What could he do? The rest of the morning dragged by slowly, each hour heavier than the last. Ben spent more time than usual trying to bury himself in paperwork, anything to keep his mind off the embarrassing interaction with Clint Eastwood. He didn't even want to glance at the news or social media, afraid that somewhere, someone had posted a clip or a tweet about the ridiculous incident. It wasn't until around lunch that Ben's phone rang. He saw the caller ID and froze. It was the dealership's lawyer, someone he only called in rare, serious situations. He picked up the phone, trying to mask his nerves. "Hello? Ben." The lawyer's voice was clipped. "I need you to come down to the office. We've got a situation." Ben's stomach churned. "What kind of situation?" "I just got word that Clint Eastwood is now the new owner of the dealership," the lawyer said, making Ben's heart drop to his feet. The acquisition was finalized this morning. Ben's brain scrambled to process the words. Clint Eastwood. Owner? But how? Why? He had only walked in looking for a car, hadn't even been serious about buying one. "I'm sorry, what?" Ben stammered, trying to wrap his head around the idea. "Clint Eastwood is the new owner of the dealership? How is that even possible?" The lawyer's voice was calm but firm. "The deal went through quietly. He's been an investor for a while, but now he's taken full control. I need you here as soon as possible. We need to discuss the next steps." Ben couldn't respond right away. He just stood there in shock, processing everything that was happening. Clint Eastwood wasn't just some random celebrity wandering into his dealership. He was the new owner. The man he had rudely dismissed without even realizing who he was had just become his boss. He stood frozen for a moment, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. This was either the most embarrassing moment of his career or the strangest twist of fate he had ever experienced. Either way, his life as the manager of the dealership had just changed in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. Finally, Ben forced himself to hang up the phone and make his way to the office. As he walked down the hall, his mind raced. What would Clint think when he found out? Would Clint even remember the encounter? Would he hold it against Ben? Ben's thoughts were interrupted as he reached the office. He took one last deep breath before stepping inside, bracing himself for whatever was about to come next. Ben stepped into the lawyer's office, his mind still reeling. Every step felt heavier than the last as he tried to process the news that Clint Eastwood, of all people, was now the new owner of the dealership. He had always prided himself on being good at reading situations, good at managing people. Yet, this time, he had completely missed the mark. And now, he was about to face the consequences. The lawyer, Brian Willis, was already seated at his desk, his glasses perched at the edge of his nose. He didn't look surprised, more resigned, like he had expected something like this to happen sooner or later. Brian was an older man, well-versed in business dealings, with a calm demeanor that suggested he had been through more than his fair share of corporate surprises. But this was new. "Ben," Brian said, looking up from a stack of paperwork, "I take it you heard the news." Ben nodded, taking a seat across from him. He didn't trust himself to speak just yet. His heart was still racing, his mind a chaotic jumble of thoughts. "I heard. I'm still processing it." Brian gave a small, knowing smile. "I get it. It's a lot to take in. You must be wondering how this all happened so fast." "How?" Ben finally managed to speak. "I mean, I saw Clint earlier today, but I had no idea he was involved with the dealership. And now he's taking control?" His voice trailed off in disbelief. Brian pushed his glasses up his nose, flipping through the stack of papers on his desk. The acquisition was already in motion for a while now, but Clint wanted to keep it quiet. He didn't want anyone to know until everything was finalized. It seems he's had his eye on this place for a while. And well, he wanted to make it official. So, this morning, the deal went through. Ben leaned back in his chair, still stunned. But why? Why would Clint Eastwood want to buy a car dealership? This doesn't make sense. He's not exactly known for that kind of business venture. Brian shrugged. I'm not privy to all the details, but it's clear that Clint is a man who enjoys challenges, especially when it comes to things that interest him. I imagine he's always had an affinity for cars. Maybe he just wants to own something more personal, something that's his. Ben stared out the window, struggling to come to terms with the situation. He couldn't believe it. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor, director, and producer, was now his boss. And to make things worse, he had kicked the man out of the dealership earlier that morning without even recognizing him. So what now? Ben asked, his voice quieter this time. What do I do? I've messed up big time, haven't I? Brian leaned forward, his expression serious. I wouldn't say you've messed up yet, but you need to act fast. Clint is a man who values respect and professionalism, especially in business. You've got a chance to make things right, but it's going to take some work. The first step is to talk to him, apologize, and let him know that you're committed to making this dealership the best it can be. He's not the type to hold grudges, but if he sees that you're genuine, you'll have a shot. Ben exhaled sharply. I don't know if I can face him. I mean, how do you even apologize for something like this? I kicked him out of the dealership like he was just any other customer. How do I make that right? Brian gave him a reassuring look. You'll figure it out. Just be honest. People like Clint, they appreciate authenticity. And this isn't the end of the world, Ben. It's a new chapter, a new opportunity. You need to own up to your mistake and show him what kind of leader you really are. Ben nodded slowly, though the doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. He had spent years building his reputation as a manager who could handle any situation. But this was different. He had no idea how Clint would respond. There was no rulebook for this. How do you manage a Hollywood icon who's now your boss? Before he could voice his concerns, Brian stood up and handed Ben a file folder. I've got a meeting with Clint in about an hour. You should be there. He wants to meet with you, get a feel for the team and how things are going. This is your chance. Ben took the folder, feeling the weight of it in his hands. His pulse quickened. The next hour would shape everything. He had to make a good impression, and more importantly, he had to show Clint that he was worth keeping around. He couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip through his fingers. Not after what had happened. Thanks, Brian, Ben said, standing up. I'll be there, and I'll do my best. Brian nodded, giving him a slight smile. I know you will. Good luck, Ben. And remember, just be yourself. Ben left the lawyer's office, the file clutched tightly in his hand. As he walked down the hallway, the reality of what he was about to do began to sink in. He had to meet Clint Eastwood, his new boss, and try to salvage whatever chance he had left. The thought of standing face-to-face with the man he had embarrassed earlier made his stomach turn. But there was no turning back now. He arrived at the conference room a few minutes early, taking a deep breath as he entered. The table was large, polished wood gleaming under the bright lights. There was a chair at the head of the table where Clint would sit, and Ben couldn't help but picture the man in his mind. Stern, focused, maybe a little intimidating. Would Clint even remember him? Just as Ben sat down, the door opened, and Clint Eastwood stepped inside. The moment felt surreal. Ben's breath caught in his chest. Clint was dressed casually, wearing a navy blue jacket over a white shirt, his gray hair still neatly combed back. He had an air of quiet authority, as always, but there was something in his eyes that made Ben feel like he was walking into a movie set. This wasn't just some Hollywood star. This was Clint Eastwood, the icon, the man who had defined a generation of films, a man whose reputation preceded him by miles. Clint paused in the doorway, his eyes meeting Ben's. For a moment, neither man spoke. Ben stood up, his nerves threatening to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Mr. Eastwood, he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. I want to start by saying how sorry I am for what happened earlier. I didn't recognize you, and I treated you poorly. That was unprofessional, and it won't happen again." Clint regarded him silently for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "I appreciate you saying that," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "You're not the first person to make a mistake, and you won't be the last." Ben felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Clint walked to the head of the table and sat down, motioning for Ben to do the same. "Let's talk business. I'm not here to dwell on mistakes. I'm here because I think we can make this dealership something special." Ben took his seat, the weight of the moment settling over him. This was it, his chance to prove himself, and he wasn't going to blow it. Ben sat at the table across from Clint Eastwood, his palms sweaty despite the professional atmosphere that hung in the room. The air was thick with anticipation, the sound of the city outside muted by the heavy glass windows. He had always known that leadership came with challenges, but this was something entirely different. Clint Eastwood was no ordinary boss. He was a legend, a man whose decisions shaped industries, a man whose presence could silence a room. Clint, however, wasn't acting like the intimidating figure Ben had imagined. Instead, the legendary actor and now car dealership owner sat across from him with an ease that made it difficult to remember just who he was. He exuded an effortless calm, his voice low and measured, the same voice that had delivered some of the most iconic lines in movie history. "Let's keep it simple," Clint said, his gray eyes steady. "I didn't come here to change everything overnight. I bought this dealership because I believe in the potential of this business, and I see good people working here. But that doesn't mean we don't need to improve." Ben nodded, trying to steady his racing heart. "I understand, Mr. Eastwood. I really do. And I'm ready to make whatever changes are needed. I want to prove that I'm capable of handling this place." Clint leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Proving yourself isn't the issue, Ben. The real question is, do you have the vision to take this place to the next level?" Ben swallowed. He hadn't been expecting such a direct question so early in the conversation. For a moment, he struggled to find the right words, but then something inside him clicked. This wasn't about his past mistakes. It was about the future, about how he could work with Clint to create something special. "I think this dealership has a lot of untapped potential," Ben said, finding his voice. "We've got a great team, loyal customers, and a prime location. But I think we've been stuck in a routine for too long. We've been focusing on traditional sales tactics when we could be reaching a younger demographic, doing more with online platforms, and creating experiences that bring people back. People don't just buy cars, they buy a piece of their identity. We could be selling more than just vehicles. We could be selling an experience." Clint listened intently, nodding slightly as Ben spoke. "That's an interesting angle. I like what you're saying, but how do you plan to do that?" Ben leaned forward, feeling a surge of confidence. "We need to revamp our marketing strategies. Social media is key. Getting people engaged online is half the battle. But we also need to improve our customer service experience. If we treat every customer like they're buying a luxury car, even if they're looking for something more affordable, we'll build trust and loyalty. Word of mouth is everything in this business." Clint's gaze remained steady, but his lips curled slightly at the corners, as though he were considering Ben's words carefully. "So, you're suggesting that we not only adapt to modern trends, but that we create a unique, personalized experience for every customer?" "Exactly," Ben said, his voice filled with more certainty now. "When people walk into a dealership, they don't want to feel like they're just another transaction. They want to feel heard, respected. We can give them that, and we can do it better than anyone else in town." Clint was quiet for a long moment. Ben held his breath, unsure of what Clint's response would be. But then, Clint did something Ben hadn't expected. He smiled, a small, approving curve of his lips. "I like it," Clint said, his voice gravelly but approving. "I like your ideas, Ben, and I like your attitude. But let's be clear. This is just the beginning. The car business is tough. You're going to face obstacles. The competition is fierce, and you're going to have to make some tough calls. Are you ready for that?" Ben's pulse quickened at the challenge. "I'm ready," he said, meeting Clint's gaze without hesitation. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Clint stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. "Good. Because this isn't going to be easy. But if you're serious about making it work, we'll need a solid team behind us. And I'll be watching to see if you can build that team. Ben stood up as well, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was his moment. Clint Eastwood, his new boss, had just given him a chance to lead the dealership into a new era, and he wasn't about to waste it. "I won't let you down, Mr. Eastwood," Ben said, his voice steady but filled with determination. Clint gave him a long look, then nodded once. "I believe you. Just remember, actions speak louder than words." As Clint turned and walked toward the door, Ben felt a rush of emotions flood through him. He had managed to hold his own in the meeting. He had made his case. Now, the hard work would begin. He knew that Clint wasn't going to make this easy for him. But for the first time that day, Ben felt a sense of hope rise within him. This wasn't just a mistake that needed fixing. This was an opportunity. Ben watched Clint disappear out the door, then sat back down in his chair. His hands were still shaking, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He had earned this chance, and now it was time to prove that he was more than just a manager who had made a mistake. He was the man who could take this dealership to the next level. As the door clicked shut behind Clint, Ben's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from Emily. "Emily, hey, just heard about the meeting. What happened? How did it go?" Ben smiled to himself, typing back quickly. "Ben, it went well. He's giving me a chance. Time to make it count." He hit send, then stared out the window at the bustling city below. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like a road he was ready to travel. The following week passed in a blur. Ben was barely able to sleep, his mind constantly racing with ideas for the dealership. Clint Eastwood had given him a shot, and he wasn't going to waste it. He threw himself into his work, obsessing over the tiniest details, from the way cars were displayed on the lot to the language used on the website. Every decision felt monumental. He needed to prove that he could live up to Clint's expectations. But as the days went by, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a smooth ride. No sooner had Ben begun implementing new marketing strategies than he found himself facing resistance. Some of the senior salespeople had been with the dealership for years, and they weren't exactly thrilled about the idea of changing things up. They didn't like the push for social media engagement, the focus on younger buyers, or the idea of treating every customer like royalty. To them, it felt like a lot of fluff, just empty promises that would fizzle out. One afternoon, Ben walked into the dealership's main showroom to find Steve, one of the senior salespeople, in a heated conversation with a new customer. Steve was an old-school kind of guy. He'd been selling cars for over 30 years, and his methods were tried and true. He wasn't too keen on the idea of getting customers too excited or too involved. To him, a sale was a sale, and that was the end of it. Ben approached, keeping his distance at first. He could hear Steve's voice rising. "I'm telling you, the car's a great deal," Steve was saying, his tone firm but impatient. "It's reliable, it's durable, and it's going to get you from point A to point B with no trouble. No need for all the frills." The customer, a young woman in her 20s, wasn't having it. She looked frustrated, her arms crossed as she leaned against a display car. "But I don't just want something that works," she replied. "I want something that feels like me, something I can be excited about. I want a car that fits my lifestyle, not just my budget. This isn't just a purchase for me, it's a statement." Ben felt the tension in the air and stepped forward. "Is everything okay here?" Steve turned around, his face hardening when he saw Ben. "Oh, it's you. Yeah, we're fine. Just trying to sell a car the right way. Some people think they want all this flash and flare, but what they really need is reliability. They're not buying a dream car, they're buying a car that gets them where they need to go." The young woman shot him an exasperated look. "I don't think you get it. I'm looking for something more. Something personal." Ben could feel his frustration bubbling up. He was tired of seeing these outdated sales tactics put to use, especially when they were clearly missing the mark with younger buyers. "Steve," Ben said, his voice firm but controlled, "we've talked about this before. We can't keep selling cars the way we did 30 years ago. It's about creating an experience, not just making a sale. Customers want to feel heard, like they matter. We need to connect with them on a deeper level." Steve grunted in frustration. "You don't get it, Ben. Not everyone wants to sit around talking about their feelings. They want a good deal, and that's all. Ben took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. It's not about feelings, Steve. It's about building a relationship with the customer. We're not just selling a car. We're selling an experience, a sense of belonging. If we keep treating people like they're just another paycheck, we're going to lose them to dealerships that know how to connect with their clients. Steve's lips curled into a sneer. And what? You think Clint Eastwood wants us to start acting all soft and cuddly with people? This is a car dealership, not a therapy session. Ben's patience was wearing thin. Clint wants us to adapt, Steve. He wants us to stay relevant, to build long-term relationships, not just short-term sales. If we keep doing things the old way, we're going to fall behind. There was a long, tense silence between them. The young woman looked between them, unsure of what to make of the confrontation. Finally, Steve snorted and muttered something under his breath before walking away, leaving Ben standing with the customer. Ben turned to the woman, offering a tight smile. I'm sorry about that. I promise, this isn't how we usually operate here. What I should have asked you earlier is, what kind of car are you really looking for? The young woman smiled a little, relaxing. Thank you. I just want something that matches my style. I'm an artist, so I want something that feels unique and fun, you know? Ben's eyes lit up. Now we're getting somewhere. Let me show you a few cars that might fit that description. We've got some great options that have a lot of personality. I think you'll love them. The rest of the interaction went smoothly, with Ben helping the customer narrow down her choices and guiding her through the process with the enthusiasm and care he believed the dealership needed. By the end of the day, she had signed a deal on a sleek, sporty car that was as unique as her personality. Ben felt a sense of pride swelling inside him. This was the kind of experience he wanted to create for every customer. Later that day, Ben sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. He was reviewing the dealership's sales figures when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Clint. Clint, I heard about the sale today. Good work, Ben. Keep it up. Ben smiled to himself, feeling a sense of relief. Maybe Clint Eastwood wasn't just a figurehead in this business. Maybe he really understood the changes that needed to be made. Just then, his door creaked open, and Emily poked her head inside. Got a minute? Ben gestured for her to come in, pushing aside the thoughts about Clint for the moment. Of course. What's up? Emily sat down across from him, her expression a little more serious than usual. I overheard some of the staff talking earlier, and it sounds like not everyone is on board with your new approach. There's a lot of pushback, especially from the sales team. Steve's not the only one. Ben exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but what choice do we have? If we don't evolve, we're going to get left behind. It's not just about selling cars. It's about changing the culture of the whole place. Emily nodded thoughtfully. I agree, but you need to find a way to bring the team on board. Steve's been here for decades, and a lot of the others look up to him. If they see him resisting the changes, they might start doubting you. Ben looked out the window, considering her words. I'll figure something out. I can't let the old ways hold us back, but it's going to take time. Emily smiled. Just don't forget the people who are already with you. Not everyone is going to change overnight, but with time, I think they'll see the bigger picture. Ben nodded. He appreciated Emily's insight. She had always been there when he needed advice or a sounding board. He felt a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't going to be an easy road, but if anyone could steer this ship in the right direction, it was him. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Ben's life had become consumed by the dealership, its triumphs and its struggles. He was constantly juggling meetings, brainstorming new strategies, and dealing with the increasingly vocal resistance from the older staff. While some were beginning to warm to the idea of a more modern approach, others, like Steve, seemed determined to hold on to the past, convinced that the dealership's old-school methods were the key to success. Ben had expected the pushback, but it was harder than he thought to make real progress. Every time he thought he'd taken a step forward, someone would resist. However, through it all, he clung to Clint's words. Actions speak louder than words. He had to show them. He had to prove that these changes weren't just about keeping up with trends, they were necessary for the survival of the business. One morning, Ben received an email that made his heart race. It was from Clint. Clint, Ben, I'm flying in tomorrow to check on the progress. Make sure everything is in order. Ben blinked at the screen, reading the message twice. Clint Eastwood was coming to the dealership tomorrow. He didn't have much time. He scrambled to make sure everything was ready. He couldn't afford to mess this up. He walked through the dealership, running over every detail in his head. The new cars on the lot had to be spotless. The team had to be prepared, and their attitudes needed to shift. Ben knew that if Clint saw anything less than excellence, he'd lose his chance to prove himself. It wasn't just a matter of impressing Clint. It was about showing the entire team that his approach was the future of the dealership. The morning of Clint's visit arrived, and Ben was up before dawn, getting everything ready. He wore his best suit, sleek, professional, and put together. And when he arrived at the dealership, he found that the usual hum of activity had already started. Employees were busy prepping cars, cleaning the lot, and organizing paperwork. But beneath the surface, there was a palpable tension. It wasn't just about the physical preparations. It was about the underlying uncertainty among the team. Would Clint approve? Would he like the changes Ben had been pushing for? Ben stood in front of the dealership, his hands stuffed into his pockets as he watched the sun rise over the horizon. It felt like the calm before a storm. He couldn't shake the feeling that this visit could make or break everything. "Hey, Ben, how's it looking?" Emily asked, coming up beside him. He sighed. "It's all on the line today. Clint's not just checking up on the sales. He wants to see if this place is really ready for a change. He wants to see if I'm ready for a change." Emily gave him a reassuring smile. "You've got this. You've been working your tail off, and you've already proven you can handle tough situations. Just stay calm." Clint respects authenticity. Ben gave her a tight smile, appreciating her encouragement. She was right. He couldn't let the pressure get to him. He had to show Clint and the team that he believed in the changes, no matter the resistance. Just as the dealership started to fill with customers and staff, Clint's sleek black car pulled up. He stepped out of the vehicle with his usual quiet confidence, dressed casually in a denim jacket and jeans. Ben felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen Clint in films countless times, but now, standing in front of him, the man was even more imposing in person. His eyes were sharp, taking in everything as he walked toward Ben. "Morning, Ben," Clint said with a nod. "Looks like we're ready to get to work." Ben swallowed his nerves and extended his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Eastwood. Welcome. We've been working hard to make sure everything's in top shape for today." Clint's gaze swept over the showroom and the lot, his face unreadable. "Let's take a walk. I want to see how it all works in action." Ben led Clint through the dealership, giving him a tour. He pointed out the updated car displays, the new customer service station, and the revamped waiting area that offered free coffee and comfortable seating. He showed Clint the social media accounts they'd been working to improve and the new online ads that were beginning to gain traction. Clint stopped in front of one of the most expensive vehicles on the lot, a shiny, black sports car with sleek lines and cutting-edge technology. "This one's a beauty," Clint said, running his hand over the smooth surface. "How's the customer response?" "It's been good. But the truth is, we're trying to reach a wider audience now, people who might not have considered us before. I want to show that we're more than just luxury cars. We're about experiences, about feeling like your car matches your life," Ben explained, a little more animated now. Clint's gaze softened for a moment, and he gave a small nod. "I like that," he said quietly. "I really do. But you're not going to get there just by showing off the high-end stuff. You need to make sure the entire team is on board with the vision. If they're not, nothing's going to change." Ben nodded, knowing exactly what Clint meant. He had to deal with the resistance head-on, starting with Steve. "Come on, let's talk to some customers," Clint suggested, his voice a little more casual now. Ben led Clint over to the sales floor, where a couple of young buyers were looking over a mid-range sedan. Ben introduced them to Clint, who shook their hands and struck up a conversation with them. It didn't take long for Clint to effortlessly connect with them, talking about their interests and their needs in a way that made them feel understood. Ben watched the interaction closely, learning from Clint's approach. It was subtle but powerful. Clint didn't rush the sale. He simply listened, allowing the customer to feel heard before offering advice. There was no hard sell, just a connection. After Clint spoke with the customers, They walked over to the desk, and Clint gave Ben a look that said everything. This is where you need to focus, Ben. It's not about pushing for a sale. It's about building a connection. You've got a good team here. Don't let the naysayers stand in your way. Ben couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over him. Clint wasn't criticizing him. He was validating his approach. The pressure that had been building up in his chest finally began to ease. As Clint got ready to leave, he turned to Ben and gave him a final piece of advice. You've got potential, Ben. Don't forget that. Keep pushing forward, but remember, you're only as strong as your team. Get them on your side, and you'll be unstoppable. Ben watched Clint drive away, a sense of purpose filling his chest. He wasn't just going to survive this challenge. He was going to lead the dealership into a new era, no matter what it took. He turned back to the dealership, determination in his eyes. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but Ben was more ready than ever to face it. The aftermath of Clint Eastwood's visit lingered in the air for days. The dealership had received a newfound energy, one that Ben hadn't anticipated. Even Steve, though begrudgingly, seemed to be warming up to some of the changes. The idea that Clint had supported Ben's vision had given the whole team a sense of reassurance. It was like a weight had been lifted from Ben's shoulders. He was no longer alone in this battle to reshape the dealership. Clint's approval meant more than just a pat on the back. It was a signal to everyone that things were changing. However, despite the visible changes in the atmosphere, there was still tension. Beneath the surface, the resistance hadn't gone away. People weren't speaking as openly about their frustrations, but Ben could feel the undercurrents. Steve and his colleagues were just waiting for a mistake, waiting for Ben to slip up. They needed to believe that their old ways were the right ones, that their experience, their long-standing methods, would ultimately win out. Ben had made a promise to himself. He wouldn't let that happen. He couldn't let the dealership fall back into the same rut. The progress he'd made wasn't just about boosting sales. It was about creating a culture, a new identity that could withstand the changing tides of the industry. The phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was Emily. Hey, Emily. What's up? Ben, we need to talk. Emily's voice was tense. There's something going on, and I don't think it's something we can ignore any longer. His heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I've been hearing some chatter around the dealership. It's about Steve, she said, her voice lowering slightly. I'm not sure what's going on, but there's been talk that he's trying to get people on his side. It's not good. Ben felt a surge of anxiety. He had suspected as much. He knew that Steve wasn't the type to back down easily. Still, hearing about it directly from Emily was disheartening. He'd hoped that Clint's visit would have made it clear to the team that Ben was in charge now. The changes were coming whether they liked it or not. What's he saying? Ben asked, trying to keep his voice steady. It's subtle, but I'm hearing things like, Ben doesn't know what he's doing, and this place was better before all these changes. He's making people doubt your decisions, Emily explained. I think we need to confront this before it gets worse. If we don't, Steve's going to divide the team. Ben let out a frustrated breath. He had known that Steve wasn't going to accept the changes quietly, but this was worse than he imagined. It wasn't just about resisting change anymore. It was about undermining Ben's authority, actively trying to sabotage his leadership. I'll take care of it, Ben said, his voice firm. I won't let this happen. Emily hesitated for a moment. Just be careful, Ben. I know you can handle this, but remember, Steve's been here longer than anyone else. People respect him. Ben couldn't deny that Emily had a point. Steve's decades of experience had earned him a certain level of respect, and Ben would have to approach this delicately. He couldn't just fire shots across the bow. He needed to address the problem head-on, without escalating things further. Thanks for the heads-up, Emily, Ben said. I'll talk to him and figure it out. I appreciate you looking out for me. As the call ended, Ben's mind raced. He couldn't afford to wait on this. He needed to act quickly before Steve's influence spread any further. If he allowed Steve to continue undermining him, it could set the dealership back months, maybe even years. But how could he confront Steve without making things worse? The last thing he wanted was a confrontation that would escalate into a full-blown rebellion. Ben knew the answer lay in one simple principle: honesty. He needed to make Steve see the bigger picture. He needed to make him understand that the future of the dealership wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about building something better, together. That afternoon, Ben called Steve into his office. The moment Steve stepped in, Ben knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. Steve's posture was stiff, his face set in a permanent frown. "You wanted to see me?" Steve asked, his tone sharp. Ben gestured for him to sit down. "Yeah, I think we need to talk." Steve crossed his arms, clearly on the defensive. "About what?" "I've been hearing some things, Steve," Ben began. "I know things haven't been easy since we've started making changes around here. But I think it's time we address this, whatever it is that's been going on behind the scenes." Steve's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Ben took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I understand that change is difficult, but what I'm hearing is that you're trying to get people to doubt the direction we're heading. And honestly, Steve, I need to know why. Why are you trying to tear this place down instead of helping it grow?" Steve's eyes narrowed. "I'm not tearing anything down, Ben. I'm just saying that the way you're doing things, it's not working. You're pushing things that don't make sense. People don't want change, they want results." Ben kept his voice steady, despite the growing frustration. "I'm not pushing change for the sake of it, Steve. I'm pushing change because the old way isn't going to keep us competitive. It's not going to keep us alive in this market. I want this dealership to thrive, and I want the whole team to come with me on this journey." Steve leaned forward, his tone colder now. "I've been here longer than you, Ben. I know how this works. You can't just throw a bunch of new ideas at the wall and hope something sticks." Ben's heart raced. "I know you've been here a long time, Steve, and I respect that. But just because something's always been done a certain way doesn't mean it's the best way. The world is changing. The market is changing. And if we don't change with it, we're going to fall behind." There was a long pause. Steve stared at Ben, his expression unreadable. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know if I believe in all this, Ben, but I get where you're coming from. You're trying to make something better. Maybe I've been a little stubborn. I'll give you that." Ben nodded, relieved that they were getting somewhere. "All I'm asking is that you keep an open mind. I'm not asking anyone to completely throw away what's worked in the past. I just want us to evolve." Steve rubbed his temples. "Yeah, well, I'll try. But I can't promise I'm going to be on board with everything." Ben offered a small, hopeful smile. "That's all I'm asking for. Let's work together. We're in this as a team." As Steve left the office, Ben felt a sense of cautious optimism. The conversation hadn't been perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he might actually be able to bring the team together. If only he could keep building on this momentum. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The dealership was busy, as always, but now there was an undercurrent of change in the air. Ben could feel it in the way his team interacted with each other. Steve was quieter, and though he didn't exactly embrace the changes, he had agreed to stop actively resisting them. For Ben, that was a small win, a foothold in his battle to turn the dealership around. But as the days wore on, Ben realized something that made him uneasy. While Steve had backed off, the division within the team hadn't disappeared. There was still a lingering skepticism among the staff. Some of the older employees had started to question his decisions more openly, and even though they hadn't been as vocal as Steve, their doubts were starting to spread. The shift wasn't just going to happen overnight. Ben understood that, but every little setback, every bit of resistance made him question if he was doing the right thing. One afternoon, as he was sorting through some reports in his office, Emily came in, looking concerned. Her usual optimism was tempered by something else in her eyes, something that told Ben that the storm was far from over. "Hey, Ben," Emily said, closing the door behind her. "I need to talk to you about something. It's about the team." Ben straightened, instinctively bracing himself for whatever was coming. "What's going on?" "I've been hearing more murmurs," she said, pacing in front of his desk. "Not just from Steve, but from others, too. It's like people are waiting for you to fail. I know they don't mean it maliciously, but they don't believe in the direction we're heading." Ben leaned back in his chair, trying to hide his frustration. "I know. I felt it too," Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Ben, it's not just about the changes you're making. It's about trust. They don't trust you yet." And they won't, not until you show them that you can lead them through this. Ben nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. Trust. It was the one thing he hadn't accounted for. He'd been so focused on implementing changes that he hadn't given enough thought to building the trust of the people he was leading. That was a serious oversight on his part. Okay, he said, standing up. So, what do we do? Emily looked at him earnestly. You need to prove yourself, Ben. But not just through the numbers or the changes you're making. You need to show them that you're in this with them, that you'll fight for them, that you won't back down no matter how tough things get. Ben's mind raced as he processed her words. How do I do that? I can't just make them trust me overnight. I know, Emily replied softly, but you can start by having their backs. When they see that you're not just a boss looking for results, but someone who actually cares about them, about the team, they'll start to come around. It's going to take time, but you can't give up now. Ben took a deep breath. Emily was right. This wasn't just about the numbers or the bottom line. It was about building a foundation of trust, one that would carry the dealership and him through the rough times ahead. That night, Ben lay awake in bed, thinking about what Emily had said. He couldn't afford to lose the team's faith now, not when they were so close to breaking through. The dealership was on the cusp of a new era, but only if they could all move forward together. And for that to happen, Ben had to prove that he was more than just a manager. He had to show his team that he believed in them, that they were in this together, every step of the way. The next morning, Ben walked into the dealership with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to wait for his team to come to him. He was going to show them, through his actions, that he had their backs. He called a meeting with everyone, the sales team, the service department, the administrative staff. It was time to level with them. As they gathered in the conference room, Ben could feel the familiar tension in the air. He stood at the front, looking at their faces, all of them waiting for him to say something important. He could almost hear their unspoken doubts, the ones they didn't voice but carried with them like a weight. Listen, everyone, Ben began, his voice steady but sincere. I know things haven't been easy lately. I know some of you don't trust the direction we're going, and I get that. Change is hard. And I've been so focused on pushing us forward that I've probably ignored some of the things that really matter, like earning your trust. And for that, I'm sorry. There was a moment of silence as Ben let his words sink in. He could feel the eyes of the team on him, and the weight of their judgment was heavy. But he pushed forward. I'm not here to tell you that we're going to change everything overnight. What I can promise is that I'm in this with all of you. I want to build something great, not just for the dealership but for each and every one of you. This is a team effort, and I need you to believe in me the way I believe in you. He paused, looking around the room. There was still hesitation, but there was something else too. Something that told him they were listening, that they were starting to see him not just as a boss, but as someone who truly cared. I'm not perfect, Ben continued, but I'm willing to fight for this dealership, and I'm willing to fight for all of you. I can't do this alone, but together, we can make this dealership the best it's ever been. The room was quiet for a long moment before Steve, of all people, stood up. Ben wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this would be a defining moment. Steve looked at him, his expression unreadable, before he spoke. You're right, Ben, Steve said, his voice gruff but not as cold as usual. You're not perfect, but nobody is. You've made some mistakes, and we've had our differences. But I'll give you this, you're trying. And I can respect that. Ben felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was progress. For the first time, he felt like Steve wasn't just tolerating him. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to come around. The rest of the team exchanged glances, and slowly, one by one, they nodded. It wasn't unanimous. Not yet. But there was a shift in the room, a subtle change that Ben could feel in the air. That evening, as he sat in his office reflecting on the day, Ben felt a sense of cautious optimism. He knew the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but for the first time, he felt like he had a real shot at turning this dealership around. The trust was starting to build, piece by piece. And that, he realized, was what would make the difference in the end. The next few weeks felt like a delicate balancing act. Ben had managed to earn a little trust from his team, but he knew that one misstep could send everything crashing down. The skepticism that lingered, particularly from the older employees, wasn't gone yet. He'd built a bridge, but it wasn't strong enough to hold the weight of any serious conflict. He had to keep proving himself, step by step, and so he did. Every morning, Ben made it a point to be the first one in the dealership. He didn't just sit in his office, reviewing reports. He was out there on the floor, talking to the salespeople, checking in with the service department, asking for feedback, and showing his team that he was genuinely invested in the work they were doing. He was no longer just a manager. He was a part of the team. One afternoon, as Ben walked through the service bay, he spotted one of the technicians, Matt, sitting in a corner, wiping his hands on a rag. Matt had been with the dealership longer than Ben had, and though he wasn't a troublemaker, he was always quiet and reserved. Ben had noticed that Matt had been distant, never quite buying into the changes. "Matt," Ben said, walking over to him, "how's it going today?" Matt glanced up from his rag, his face showing little emotion. "Busy," he replied, his voice gruff. "You know how it is." Ben nodded, but he could tell there was something more behind Matt's response. "You've been quiet lately," he said, trying to break through the wall. "Is everything okay?" Matt hesitated for a moment before leaning back against the wall, looking down at his hands. "I don't know, Ben," he said slowly. "I don't know about all this new stuff. It's just hard to see where it's all going. We've been doing this the same way for so long. Change is a lot." Ben could feel the weight of Matt's words. "I get it. Believe me, I do. But I'm not trying to make things harder for anyone. I just want us to do better, together." Matt raised an eyebrow. "Better? How's all this better supposed to work, then?" "I'm working on a plan," Ben said, lowering his voice a little. "I've been listening to the team, and I'm figuring out where we can make improvements. It's not about changing everything overnight. It's about small things, things that will make us stronger in the long run." Matt didn't respond right away, but he nodded slowly. "I'll believe it when I see it," he muttered, looking back down at the rag in his hands. It wasn't much, but it was a small crack in Matt's hard exterior. Ben knew it was going to take time to get through to people like Matt, but this felt like a step forward, even if it was a small one. Later that week, Ben got another surprise. He received a call from Clint Eastwood's office, informing him that Clint wanted to meet again. This time, it wasn't just a casual check-in. Clint wanted to discuss something more significant. "Clint Eastwood wants to meet with me?" Ben repeated, almost incredulously, as he hung up the phone. He couldn't believe it. It had only been a few weeks since Clint's visit, and now he was calling for another meeting? Was he going to offer more advice? More support? Or was there something else? Either way, Ben knew this was an opportunity he couldn't afford to squander. The meeting was set for the following Monday, and Ben arrived early, wearing his best suit, eager and slightly nervous. He'd been growing used to handling challenges on his own, but this was Clint Eastwood, a legendary actor, a business mogul, and now, it seemed, a potential ally in his fight to transform the dealership. He had to make a good impression. As Ben entered Clint's office, he found the man himself seated behind a large wooden desk. Clint was casually dressed in a button-down shirt, his trademark squinting gaze fixing Ben with an expression that was difficult to read. There was no grandeur, no star power. It was just Clint, and that was somehow more intimidating. "Ben," Clint said, his voice gravelly, yet warm, "thanks for coming in." Ben sat down, trying to steady his nerves. "Of course, Mr. Eastwood. It's an honor." Clint waved a hand dismissively. "None of that. Call me Clint. We're both here for the same thing, aren't we?" Ben nodded, feeling more at ease. "I think so." Clint leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "I've been keeping an eye on what you've been doing at the dealership, Ben. I gotta admit, I didn't expect much at first, but I've seen some things I like. You're pushing in the right direction. Not everyone likes change, but they'll learn to appreciate it." Ben felt a surge of hope. "Thank you. That means a lot." Clint gave a slight smirk. "You're doing all right. But here's the thing. You've got potential. This dealership could be more than just another car lot. You could make it a destination. You could make people excited to come in. People like you, Ben. You've got that fire. But there's something I've learned over the years. If you're going to make big moves, you've got to be bold. You've got to take risks. If you're always playing it safe, you'll never stand out. Ben took Clint's words to heart. I've been trying to push the envelope a bit, but there's resistance, and I can feel it in the air. I've got a lot of people who don't believe in what I'm doing yet. Clint's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. That's normal. Hell, it's always been that way in any business. You've got to prove them wrong, Ben. Don't let them hold you back. Ben nodded, feeling the weight of Clint's wisdom. I'll keep pushing forward. I'm not backing down. Clint smiled, his expression softening just slightly. That's what I like to hear. You've got what it takes. You just have to believe in yourself. With that, Clint stood, extending his hand. You've got this, Ben. Just don't forget, sometimes, the best risks lead to the biggest rewards. Ben shook Clint's hand firmly, a renewed sense of determination burning inside him. This meeting had been more than just a check-in. It was a reaffirmation of everything he was working toward. Clint wasn't just a celebrity or a benefactor. He was a mentor, a guide, and someone who saw potential in Ben even when others didn't. Walking out of Clint's office, Ben felt a sense of excitement he hadn't experienced in a long time. Maybe he wasn't quite there yet, but with Clint's support, the support of his growing team, and his own unwavering belief in the future, he knew one thing for sure. The dealership was going to thrive. He was more than ready for whatever came next. The days following his meeting with Clint Eastwood were some of the most intense Ben had experienced in his leadership role. There was a renewed sense of purpose in his every decision, and a new determination to push forward despite the challenges that still lingered. Clint's words, sometimes, the best risks lead to the biggest rewards, echoed in his mind constantly. Ben knew that taking risks was the only way to break through the resistance his team still had. It wasn't just about making minor changes anymore. It was about making bold decisions that would force everyone to rethink what they were doing at the dealership. He couldn't play it safe if he wanted to see real transformation. He had to take chances and show his team that he believed in their ability to adapt. On Tuesday morning, Ben called a meeting with Steve and the rest of the management team. He had something important to propose, a new strategy that he believed would set them apart from every other dealership in the area. It was a risk, but it felt right. The stakes were high, but if it worked, it could completely change the way the dealership was perceived. As everyone gathered around the conference table, Ben could see the familiar tension in the room. Steve had been less resistant lately, but the other managers still looked uncertain, their eyes darting from one another as if waiting for someone to challenge Ben's authority. He had to get their buy-in. I've been thinking about our approach to sales, Ben began, breaking the silence. We've been doing things the same way for too long. It's not working anymore. I want us to stand out, really stand out. And that's going to require a shift in how we do things. It's time we stopped thinking of ourselves as just another dealership and started thinking of ourselves as a brand, a destination. Steve raised an eyebrow. A brand? You mean, we're going to start selling ourselves like some sort of lifestyle? Ben nodded, leaning forward in his chair. Exactly. We're selling more than cars here. We're selling an experience. The customer should feel like they're stepping into something new, something exciting, not just walking into a place where they're going to haggle over prices. We're going to offer personalized service that goes beyond the sale. We're going to change the way people think about car buying. The room was silent as his words hung in the air. Ben could see the wheels turning in the minds of his team. Some of them looked intrigued, while others remained doubtful. We'll implement an experience-based selling model, Ben continued. We'll have designated customer experience managers who will walk customers through the entire buying process, ensuring they get what they need every step of the way. It's going to be high-touch, personalized, and customer-first. We'll also introduce incentives for repeat customers, and we'll leverage social media to show off our community involvement. But to make this work, we're all going to have to buy in and give it our all. Steve crossed his arms. Sounds like a lot of extra work, Ben. How are we going to pull this off? Ben met Steve's gaze, feeling the weight of the question. He wasn't wrong. It was going to be a lot of work, and it was going to require everyone to put in more effort than they had before. But that was the point. It was about showing everyone, customers and employees alike, that they were worth it. We'll start small, Ben said confidently. We'll pick one area to focus on, maybe our used car inventory, and test it out. We'll make sure the customers know that we're offering something they can't get anywhere else. There was a pause, and then one of the other managers, Lisa, spoke up. I like the idea. It's bold. We've been stagnant for too long, and maybe it's time to shake things up a bit. Ben smiled, encouraged by the response. Exactly. I know it's going to be a challenge, but it's the kind of challenge that can change everything. We have the opportunity to do something special here, and I believe we can make it work. The meeting ended with a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism. It wasn't an immediate win, Ben knew that. But for the first time, he felt like he had the support of the management team. They were willing to give his idea a shot, and that was a step in the right direction. As the day went on, Ben's excitement only grew. He was making the right moves. He could feel it. He was starting to take the risks Clint had spoken of, and with each decision, he could see a little more momentum building. But the question remained, would his team follow through? Would they see the vision the way he did? He wasn't sure yet, but he was more committed than ever to making it happen. His faith in the process had only deepened since Clint's words, and now, more than ever, he believed in the dealership's potential. The next day, Ben received an email from Clint Eastwood's office. It was brief but encouraging. Keep pushing, Ben. Don't stop now. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a massive vote of confidence. Clint believed in him, and that belief was fueling Ben's determination. If Clint Eastwood, someone who had seen success and failure, who had built an empire, could see something in him, then maybe he was on the right path after all. Ben sat back in his chair, looking out over the dealership floor. The changes had started, but this was just the beginning. There was still so much to be done, so much that could go wrong. But in this moment, Ben had a glimmer of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were on the verge of something great. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first signs of change began to ripple through the dealership in subtle ways. Ben had been working tirelessly to implement his vision, small, customer-focused touches that would begin to set them apart. The initial response was encouraging, but there were still many skeptics in the building. The real challenge, Ben knew, was getting everyone on board, particularly the sales team, who had been accustomed to doing things their own way for years. It was early Friday morning when the dealership's first test of the new model was set to begin. Ben had arranged for a special sales event aimed at introducing their reimagined approach to the public. An exclusive, appointment-only event where a select group of customers would get the red carpet treatment. The plan was to make the car-buying process feel as personal and unique as possible, offering tailored recommendations, test drives, and personalized consultations. This would be the dealership's first big step toward becoming a destination, rather than just a car lot. The day before the event, Ben had a meeting with the sales team. He could feel the tension in the room. There were a few who seemed genuinely excited about the idea, but others looked downright resistant. I know you all have questions, Ben began, standing at the front of the meeting room. And I know some of you are worried about this shift, but I believe in this. I believe in what we can do here. This isn't just about selling cars. It's about making a difference in how people experience this process. Steve, the head of sales, crossed his arms, his face a mask of skepticism. It's going to be hard to change the way we do things overnight, Ben. We've been selling cars a certain way for a long time. People expect the traditional process. You can't just turn that on its head. Ben nodded, understanding Steve's concerns. It was a valid point. I get that, Steve. This isn't about turning everything upside down right away. It's about taking the first step and showing people that we can do something better. I'm asking for your trust, just for this event. If we can make this work, we'll have the proof we need to take it further. One of the newer sales associates, Rachel, spoke up, her voice tentative but hopeful. I'm on board. I think it's worth a shot. If we want to stand out, we have to do something different. But how do we make sure our customers get the full experience? Ben smiled, glad to see some support. That's the beauty of it, Rachel. We'll have customer experience managers assigned to every client. They'll guide them through the entire process, help them find the right car, answer their questions, and provide a personalized test drive experience. It's all about showing the customer we care, that they're not just another transaction. There was a murmur of agreement from a few of the others, but Ben could still feel the wariness in the room. Steve, as always, was the hardest to convince. He wasn't sure whether it was his years of experience or simply a matter of pride, but Ben could tell he was on edge about taking such a big leap. "I don't know if I can get behind this whole customer experience manager thing," Steve said, raising his hands in exasperation. "It feels like we're treating the customers like royalty. They just want a good deal, not some show." Ben didn't back down. "It's not a show, Steve. It's about making the whole process feel worth it. It's about showing our customers that they're valued, that they're not just here to haggle. We're giving them something they can't get anywhere else." For a long moment, the room was silent. Ben could feel the weight of his words pressing down on the team. The clock was ticking, and they needed to be prepared for the event. Ben couldn't afford for there to be any more doubts. Finally, Steve sighed, uncrossing his arms. "All right, Ben. I'll give it a try. But if this goes south, I'm holding you responsible." Ben nodded, relieved to have Steve's reluctant approval. "That's all I'm asking for. Let's make this work, and then we'll see where it goes." The next day, the dealership buzzed with nervous energy as the sales team prepared for the event. There was a strange tension in the air. Excitement, yes, but also uncertainty. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, wondering if this new approach would actually pay off. At 10 a.m., the first group of customers arrived. They were greeted by a team of customer experience managers, each of whom was assigned to ensure that each customer's experience was smooth, informative, and personalized. The employees guiding the customers were no longer just focusing on making a sale. They were focused on creating an experience that felt unique to each person who walked through the door. Ben watched from the sidelines, nervous but hopeful. He saw the interactions between the sales staff and the customers, how they were no longer just trying to close a deal but were engaging in real conversations about the customer's needs, preferences, and lifestyles. It felt different, more human, and more genuine. It wasn't perfect. There were hiccups along the way. Some customers still expected the old-school haggle and deal approach. But Ben could see the potential. The customers who embraced the new process were visibly impressed. They were taking longer to browse, asking more questions, and, most importantly, feeling like they mattered. By the end of the day, the results were better than Ben had dared hope. The event had been a success, with several cars sold at full price and multiple repeat appointments scheduled for the following week. But more importantly, Ben had seen something that confirmed his vision. People were willing to pay a little more for a better experience. They were willing to come back, not just because of the cars, but because of the way they were treated. In the following days, word spread. Customers who attended the event began telling their friends, posting about their experience on social media, and leaving glowing reviews online. The dealership's reputation was slowly starting to shift. It wasn't just about the cars anymore. It was about the experience, the feeling of being treated like a valued customer instead of just another sale. However, Ben knew this was only the beginning. They had made strides, yes, but the real challenge was maintaining this momentum and continuing to prove that this wasn't just a fluke. It would take consistency, hard work, and, most importantly, trust. He had taken a risk, and it had paid off. Now, the next step was even more critical, keeping the faith of his team and making sure they stayed committed to the vision. That night, Ben reflected on how far they had come. It had been a rocky road, but they had made it through the first real test. And in that moment, Ben felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger than he had ever imagined. The days following the success of the special sales event were filled with a mixture of triumph and growing uncertainty. While Ben was elated by the positive feedback and the initial success, the true test would come in the weeks that followed. This first event had created a buzz, but he knew that buzz alone wouldn't keep the momentum going. They had to be consistent, and that's where the real challenge lay. Ben spent the next few days meeting with his team, ensuring everyone was on the same page. The customer experience managers, who had been handpicked for their enthusiasm and attention to detail, were reporting great success. Customers had loved the personalized service, and the sales numbers were up. But not everything was as smooth as it seemed on the surface. Steve had called Ben into his office one afternoon after a week of follow-up calls and feedback from the sales team. There were murmurs that some of the traditional salespeople were growing frustrated with the new approach. They felt sidelined, as if their tried-and-true methods were being cast aside for something less tangible. The more Ben heard, the more he realized that it wasn't just the sales numbers that needed to change. It was the culture. "Ben, you need to talk to the team," Steve said bluntly, leaning back in his chair. "There's some grumbling going on. People don't like feeling like they're being micromanaged. They're used to handling their own customers in their own way, and now, this whole customer experience thing feels like it's stepping on their toes." Ben exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of Steve's words. He knew there would be resistance. There always was when it came to change, but hearing it directly from Steve made it feel more real, more urgent. "I understand," Ben replied, sitting down across from Steve. "But they have to understand this isn't about taking away their autonomy. It's about providing a better experience for the customer. If we want to thrive, we all need to be on the same page." Steve rubbed his temples. "I get it, Ben. I really do. But these guys are set in their ways. You're asking them to fundamentally change the way they've been doing business for years. That's going to take time." Ben leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "We don't have a lot of time, Steve. The competition is fierce, and if we don't keep innovating, we'll get left behind. I need you to help me rally the team. This is the direction we're headed, and I need everyone's buy-in. Otherwise, it's not going to work." Steve nodded reluctantly, but Ben could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. "I'll try, Ben. I'll talk to them, but you have to be prepared for some pushback. People aren't going to just accept it overnight." Ben stood up and gave Steve a reassuring nod. "I appreciate it. Let's see where we're at by next week." The next few days were tense as Ben and Steve worked behind the scenes to smooth over the growing discontent among the staff. Ben's commitment to the new model was unwavering, but it was clear that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He started meeting with the salespeople individually, listening to their concerns and offering reassurances that the new model wasn't about replacing their expertise, but about enhancing it. By Thursday, things were starting to look up. Ben had personally addressed the team during a morning meeting, taking the time to explain why the new direction was necessary. He told them that he wasn't asking them to give up their experience or their skills. Instead, he was asking them to adapt and grow with the times. "We're not just selling cars. We're creating relationships," Ben had said, his voice steady. "And if we don't evolve, we risk losing those relationships to someone else who's willing to put in the effort." It wasn't an instant fix, but slowly, Ben could see a shift in the attitude of the sales team. They were starting to embrace the new model, albeit cautiously. The team was divided into two groups: those who saw the potential in the new approach and those who remained hesitant, unsure if the changes were truly necessary. But something unexpected happened that pushed them all forward. The customer reviews from the special event began pouring in. They weren't just good, they were exceptional. Customers were praising the personalized service, the attention to detail, and the overall experience. The dealership had never seen such positive feedback, and it was starting to show in the numbers. One afternoon, Ben walked into the break room and overheard two of the more experienced salespeople, Mark and Jane, talking. They didn't notice him at first, so he stood back, listening in. "This new system, it's not as bad as I thought," Mark said, his voice low but thoughtful. "I mean, it's still a lot of work, but I can see how it's making things easier with the customers. They're actually enjoying the process." Jane, who had been more resistant to change, nodded. "I'll admit, I was skeptical, but that last client I worked with, she felt like a VIP, and she walked out of here talking about how she'd never buy from anywhere else. That's not something we've had before." Ben stepped into the room, a smile on his face. "I'm glad to hear that. It's a process, but I think you're starting to see the bigger picture." Mark turned and smiled. "You were right, Ben. It's not just about cars. It's about making people feel like they're part of something." That moment was a turning point for Ben. The team was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a temporary shift. It was the future of the dealership. It wasn't easy, but it was happening, and he could feel it. The ground was shifting beneath them. As the week drew to a close, Ben sat at his desk, reflecting on how far they had come. There was still much to be done, but the pieces were falling into place. The dealership was starting to look different, feel different. It wasn't just about the numbers anymore. It was about the relationships they were building. And then, as if to remind him of just how far he still had to go, Ben received a call that would change everything. It was from Clint Eastwood's office. "Ben, Clint wants to meet with you next week. He's impressed with the progress you've made and thinks it's time for a more personal conversation. Get ready. This could be a big moment for you." Ben felt his heart race. This could be the turning point he'd been waiting for. But was he truly ready for what came next? The call from Clint Eastwood's office felt surreal. Ben sat frozen at his desk for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand as if it might slip away from him. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. The legendary actor, producer, and now, unbeknownst to many, the new owner of the dealership. As the shock began to settle, Ben's mind raced. What could Clint possibly want with him? He had only recently made the decision to steer the dealership in a new direction, an approach that, while promising, had not yet fully been proven. Ben had taken risks, and there had been plenty of resistance from some of the staff, but things were starting to fall into place. Could this meeting be a sign that Clint was on board? Or, just as easily, could it be the end of everything? The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday afternoon. Clint's people had given him a time slot and a location, an upscale coffee shop downtown. Ben wasn't sure whether to feel excited, nervous, or downright terrified. In any case, it was happening, and there was no turning back now. Monday afternoon arrived quickly. Ben dressed carefully, trying to strike the right balance between casual and professional. As he stood in front of the coffee shop, waiting for Clint's arrival, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was the kind of meeting you read about in business magazines, or maybe saw in a movie, but Ben never imagined he would be the one sitting across from the legend himself. At precisely 2 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up and Clint Eastwood stepped out. He looked every bit the part, gravelly voice, sharp eyes, and a presence that made everyone in the room stop for a moment. He was dressed in a simple dark jacket, his signature rugged yet polished look. Ben felt a wave of admiration and nerves hit him all at once. Clint spotted him from across the street and waved, his face breaking into a small smile. As they met at the door, Clint offered a firm handshake, his grip strong but not overpowering. "Ben, good to finally meet you in person," Clint said, his voice deep but friendly. "I've been hearing good things about the direction you're taking the dealership." "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood," Ben replied, still trying to keep his composure. "It's an honor to meet you." Clint gave a quick nod as they walked into the coffee shop. Ben gestured for him to sit first, then ordered their drinks. As they sat down, Clint wasted no time getting to the point. "Listen, Ben, I've been following what you're doing with the dealership. I like what I see so far. It's bold, it's different, and it's exactly what the industry needs," Clint said, leaning back slightly in his chair. "But I'll be honest with you, this industry isn't easy. It's tough, and it takes more than a good idea to succeed. I want to know that you're in this for the long haul." Ben nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm committed to making this work, Mr. Eastwood. I believe in this vision. We're building something different, something that puts the customer experience first. It's not going to be easy, but I'm ready to put in the work." Clint took a sip of his coffee, watching Ben closely. "I'm glad to hear that, because if I'm going to invest in this, I need to know that you're the guy who's going to make it happen. It's not just about turning a profit, it's about building a brand that people trust, that people will go out of their way to buy from. And I think you have the potential to do that." Ben felt his heart race. He could feel the weight of Clint's words. This was more than just a conversation. It was a test of his vision, his leadership, and his commitment. "I won't let you down," Ben replied, his voice firm. "We're already seeing the beginning of something special. The success of our recent event is just the start. We're creating an experience that customers want to be a part of, not just a transaction they need to get through." Clint raised an eyebrow. "I've heard about that event. You had a solid turnout, right? But here's the thing, Ben. That's just one event. You need to keep delivering. This isn't about one-time sales. It's about building loyalty, building trust. People need to feel like they're part of something bigger than just buying a car." "I understand, Mr. Eastwood," Ben said, nodding again. "That's the whole point of the new direction. It's about more than just cars. It's about relationships. We're creating an experience that keeps people coming back." Clint leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "And are you sure your team is on board with this?" I've heard a few whispers of resistance. Ben hesitated. It was true. While many of the employees had embraced the new approach, there were still a few holdouts. Steve, in particular, had been vocal about his doubts, though he was coming around. But Ben knew Clint wouldn't want to hear excuses. "I'll be honest," Ben said. "There's been some pushback. Change is never easy, and not everyone has embraced it right away. But we're working through it. I'm confident that with time, the team will see the bigger picture." Clint studied him for a moment, as if weighing his words. Then, to Ben's surprise, he smiled slightly. "I like your honesty. That's what I need to hear. You're not just selling me a dream. You're telling me the truth. And that's what I appreciate." Ben felt a sense of relief. Maybe this was going better than he thought. "I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, Ben," Clint said, his tone more serious now. "I want to see this dealership succeed. I'm in for the long haul, but I need to know you're the right man to lead it. So here's what I'm proposing. I'll invest in your vision, but I want to be involved. Not in the day-to-day operations, but I want to know what's going on. I want to be part of the bigger picture. I believe in what you're doing, and I want to see it grow." Ben's mind raced. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the opportunity he couldn't have dreamed up in a million years. Clint Eastwood was offering him not just investment but mentorship, the chance to grow a business under the guidance of someone who had built an empire. "I won't let you down, Mr. Eastwood," Ben said, his voice full of conviction. Clint nodded, a small, approving smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I believe you. Let's make this thing happen." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. With Clint Eastwood's backing secured, Ben felt like he was walking on air. There was an energy in the dealership that had been missing for months, a sense of renewed purpose. Employees who had been skeptical of the new direction were now beginning to buy into the vision. The sales floor buzzed with excitement, and the customers felt it too. It wasn't just about buying a car anymore. It was about becoming part of something bigger. Ben knew that this was a pivotal moment. The momentum had shifted in his favor, but it was still fragile. He had to prove that this was more than a flash in the pan. He had to show Clint and the team that the dealership's new direction could sustain itself, that it wasn't just a one-time success. To ensure that, Ben began working even harder. His days were packed with meetings, coaching sessions with his managers, brainstorming sessions with his marketing team, and frequent check-ins with Clint's advisors. Clint had made it clear that he wanted to be involved, but not in the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day operations. Instead, Clint provided invaluable strategic advice, offering his thoughts on how to navigate challenges and stay true to the long-term vision. Ben and his team had begun implementing some of the most innovative customer service practices in the industry, things that would set them apart from the competition. They offered personalized car-buying experiences built around the customer's unique needs and preferences. For example, if a family came in looking for a minivan, they would not only test drive the car but also discuss how it would fit into their daily lives. The goal was not just to sell cars, but to help customers envision how the vehicles would make their lives better. Despite the growing success, Ben felt a gnawing sense of pressure. Every decision, every new initiative was under a microscope now. Clint's involvement meant that the stakes were higher than ever before. Ben couldn't afford to slip up, not now, not with everything on the line. But the thing about pressure was that it could either break you or push you forward. And Ben was determined to let it push him forward. One afternoon, as Ben was wrapping up a meeting with his marketing team, Steve came in looking visibly shaken. His usual confidence was replaced with a rare hint of uncertainty. "Ben, we need to talk," Steve said, closing the door behind him. Ben's heart skipped a beat. Steve rarely came to him with anything other than good news. This couldn't be about anything good. "What's going on?" Ben asked, leaning forward in his chair. "It's the sales numbers. We've hit a plateau," Steve said, running a hand through his hair. "I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but we've stalled. People are starting to question whether this approach is sustainable. The buzz is dying down, and we're not seeing the kind of growth we need." Ben felt a wave of frustration, but he kept his cool. "How bad is it?" Steve handed Ben a report, showing the latest figures. The growth in sales had leveled off, and some of the more traditional salespeople had started to grumble about the changes. "It's not a disaster, but if we don't turn this around soon, we might start losing the momentum we've worked so hard to build. Ben took a deep breath. This wasn't unexpected. He knew there would be ups and downs, and this was just a bump in the road. But the timing couldn't have been worse. With Clint Eastwood's support behind him, Ben felt like he had a duty to prove that his vision was more than just a passing trend. "We need to shake things up again," Ben said, his mind already racing with ideas. "It's not about changing everything. We just need to get people excited again. We've had success with the special events, so why not take that concept further? We could hold monthly themed events, like a family day, where customers bring in their kids and get a full-service experience, or a classic car night for enthusiasts who want to see rare models and meet fellow car lovers." Steve nodded, a spark of interest in his eyes. "That could work, but we'll need to really promote it. Get the word out, create some excitement. We can't let this slip into complacency." Ben stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the dealership lot. He knew that the key to success was never about staying still. It was about constant evolution. And in order to keep things fresh, he needed to bring something new to the table every month. This was just the beginning. "We'll ramp up our social media presence. We'll get influencers involved, and we'll have a series of behind-the-scenes videos showing how the experience works. People want to see what makes us different, and we have to show them." Steve seemed more confident now, his earlier anxiety melting away. "I think that's the kind of energy we need." Ben smiled. "Exactly. Let's put a plan together, and we'll take it from there." The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning and execution. Ben, Steve, and the team began brainstorming new event ideas and creative marketing strategies to reignite the excitement. Clint had even agreed to make a personal appearance at one of the events, which sent a surge of energy through the dealership. As they prepared for the Family Day event, the energy in the dealership was palpable. The employees were working together in a way they hadn't before, collaborating with a shared sense of purpose. Even the hesitant salespeople who had once doubted the new direction were now getting on board. The day of the event arrived, and Ben felt the pressure building again. They had put a lot of time and energy into this day, and he knew it could either be a game-changer or a misstep. But as the first families began to arrive, his anxiety started to melt away. The atmosphere was electric. There were balloons for the kids, food trucks for everyone, and special discounts for families buying together. It wasn't just a car sales event, it was an experience. Clint Eastwood arrived around mid-afternoon, looking just as effortlessly cool as ever. He didn't make a big entrance. He simply walked in, shook hands with the team, and immediately blended in with the customers. Ben watched him from a distance, noting how natural Clint seemed in the midst of it all. As the event came to a close, Ben received a message from Clint's assistant. Clint wanted to meet with him privately before leaving. Ben's heart raced again. This could be a huge moment. Clint's office was located in a quiet corner of the dealership, and when Ben walked in, Clint was already sitting behind the desk, a warm smile on his face. "You did good today, Ben," Clint said, looking up from a set of papers. "The event was a success. You're making it work. I'm impressed." Ben felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thanks, Mr. Eastwood. It's been a lot of work, but we're seeing the results." Clint stood up and walked over to the window, glancing out at the lot. "It's not just about the numbers, Ben. It's about the community you're building. People want to feel like they belong, like they're part of something. And today, you did that." Ben smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "I'm glad to hear that." Clint turned back to him. "Keep it up. You've got something special here, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you take it." The days following the Family Day event were a blur of activity. Sales numbers were up, and the buzz around the dealership was palpable. Ben knew they had hit on something special. But with success came greater expectations, and those expectations weighed heavily on him. Clint Eastwood's involvement had added a layer of intensity. While the legendary actor's mentorship and financial backing had been invaluable, it also meant that there was no room for mistakes. Ben couldn't afford to rest on his laurels. He had to keep innovating, keep pushing the limits of what they were doing. He had to show Clint that the dealership was capable of sustained growth and long-term success. But with all the excitement and progress, Ben had started to feel the pressure. The constant meetings, the relentless drive to stay ahead of the competition, and the looming threat of failure began to wear on him. There were days when he felt like he was losing sight of what truly mattered: the people, the team, and the customers. One night, after a long day at the dealership, Ben sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. He had messages from his wife, Sarah, asking how his day had gone. There were also texts from his sister, Julie, and a few from Steve. He hadn't been home for dinner in a few days, and the weight of it all was starting to sink in. The dream he had worked so hard for, the dream that Clint Eastwood believed in, was beginning to feel like an impossible mountain to climb. The thought of disappointing Clint, or his team, or even his own family, kept him up at night. The next morning, as Ben arrived at the dealership, Steve was already there, pacing in front of the sales floor. His face was serious, too serious. Ben's stomach sank as he approached. "What's going on?" Ben asked, his voice tinged with concern. Steve hesitated before speaking. "We've got a problem, Ben. Some of the team members are starting to complain. They feel like they're not getting the recognition they deserve. We're putting in the hours, but they're worried that the focus is all on you. They feel like they're being overshadowed." Ben felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had always prided himself on being a team player, on sharing the success. But now, the pressure of running things had begun to take its toll. The success of the dealership, the recognition from Clint, and the spotlight on him. Everything was starting to feel like a double-edged sword. "Who's complaining?" Ben asked. "It's not just one person. It's a few of the senior salespeople, guys who've been here for years. They're talking about how they feel left out of the process. They want more involvement in the direction we're heading," Steve said, rubbing his forehead. "And honestly, Ben, they have a point. You've been leading this, and it's been working, but we can't forget about the people who've been with us from the start." Ben sat down at his desk, running his hands through his hair. He had been so focused on the bigger picture that he hadn't noticed the small cracks forming within his own team. He hadn't realized how much the changes were affecting the people who had been loyal to the dealership for years. They weren't just employees. They were his partners. "Thanks for bringing this to me, Steve," Ben said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm going to speak with them. We need to get on the same page. We're in this together, and I can't do this without them." Later that day, Ben called a meeting with the senior salespeople. They sat around a large conference table, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Ben could tell they were frustrated, but he wasn't about to let that frustration fester. "I've heard your concerns," Ben began, his voice steady, "and I want to address them head-on. I know I've been pushing hard to get this dealership to where it needs to be, but that doesn't mean I don't value all of you and everything you've done. We're in this together. And if we're going to succeed, we need to work together, not just as individuals." One of the senior salespeople, Rick, spoke up. "Ben, it's not that we don't appreciate what you've done, but we feel like the changes are all coming from you. We don't have a say in the direction this place is going. We've been here longer than most of the new guys, and we just want to be a part of it." Ben nodded, understanding where they were coming from. "I get it. I should have been more inclusive from the start. I've been so focused on making sure we don't fall behind that I forgot to make sure everyone felt heard. That won't happen again." The room fell silent for a moment, and Ben could see the relief on their faces. They didn't need a pat on the back or a huge promotion. They just needed to know that their contributions were recognized. "I want to make sure that you all have a voice in the decisions moving forward," Ben continued. "We're a team, and I'll do better at involving everyone in the process. If you have ideas, I want to hear them. If you feel like something needs to change, I want to know about it." Rick smiled slightly, his demeanor softening. "That's all we've been asking for." As the meeting wrapped up, Ben felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The tension had dissipated, and the team seemed more united than ever. But there was still the lingering pressure of making sure Clint's investment paid off. There was still the feeling that no matter what he did, it might not be enough. That evening, Ben sat down with Sarah at their kitchen table, her concern evident as she looked at him. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. "I'm okay," Ben said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Just a lot on my plate right now. I've got to make sure everything's running smoothly, especially with Clint watching. I don't want to let anyone down." Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Ben, you've been working so hard, but don't forget about yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. You've got to take care of you, too. Ben smiled weakly. I know. It's just hard. I feel like everything's riding on this. I can't let it all fall apart. It won't fall apart, Ben, Sarah said, squeezing his hand. But you have to give yourself some grace. No one can do everything, and you're doing more than most people ever could. Don't lose sight of what really matters. Your family, your team, your happiness. Those are the things that will keep you grounded. Ben looked at her, her words sinking in. He had been so focused on the dealership's success that he had forgotten to check in with himself, with the people who mattered most. He took a deep breath, knowing that the road ahead would still be tough, but at least he wasn't alone. The next few weeks felt like a blur to Ben. The balance he had been trying to strike between his personal life, his role as a manager, and his drive to make the dealership a success had been elusive. But as the dealership reached another milestone, surpassing last year's sales figures, Ben began to feel a new sense of accomplishment. The sense of pressure that had been mounting since Clint's involvement was still there, but now it felt more like fuel for the fire than a weight to carry. Steve, who had once been a bit hesitant about the new changes, was now thriving. He had become Ben's right-hand man, taking on more responsibilities, helping to run the day-to-day operations, and even working on new strategies for customer retention. Steve's loyalty and dedication had been crucial in this success, and Ben couldn't have asked for a better partner in this journey. Still, there was something about the dealership that felt different lately. There was an energy in the air that hadn't been there before, a mix of excitement and uncertainty, like they were standing on the edge of something big. And Ben couldn't shake the feeling that Clint Eastwood was about to ask for something more. It was a Thursday afternoon when Clint's assistant called Ben to inform him that Clint wanted to meet. Ben felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach. The last time they had met, Clint had been complimentary, but there was always the sense that Clint was watching closely, expecting results. Ben made his way to the small, quiet room at the back of the dealership, where Clint was waiting. As usual, Clint was calm, collected, and exuded that undeniable presence. The man had been in the business of making waves for decades, but to Ben, he still felt larger than life. Ben, Clint greeted him with a smile. Good to see you. Good to see you, too, Ben said, settling into the chair across from Clint. Clint studied him for a moment, his gray eyes piercing but not unkind. I've been thinking about the direction the dealership's heading in, and I have to say, I'm impressed with what you've done so far. But we're not finished yet, are we? Ben paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. No, sir. We're just getting started. There's still a lot of ground to cover, and I'm pushing the team harder than ever. Clint nodded. Good. But here's the thing, Ben. We've reached a point where we can either double down or plateau. The market's competitive, and it's only going to get harder. What we're doing here has been great, but I'm not in this for short-term success. I want something lasting, something bigger. Ben felt his heart rate pick up. What are you suggesting? Clint leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. I'm suggesting we take things to the next level. I want to build a brand, something that goes beyond just selling cars. I want this dealership to be a household name. I want people to know that when they buy from us, they're not just buying a car. They're becoming part of a community. Ben's mind raced. The idea was massive, far bigger than anything they had talked about before. But the ambition in Clint's voice told Ben that this wasn't just a passing idea. It was something Clint was serious about. I'm listening, Ben said. Clint smiled slightly. I've been thinking about expanding, opening new locations. But I don't just want to open stores in random cities. I want to go after markets that are ripe for innovation, places where the competition is lacking and we can disrupt the system. But it's going to take more investment, more risk. Are you ready for that? Ben's mind was spinning. Expanding the dealership? Opening new locations? It was exactly what he had dreamed of, but it also terrified him. He had worked so hard to get this far, and now Clint was talking about scaling up, potentially exposing them to more risks than Ben was comfortable with. But there was no denying that this was an opportunity he couldn't ignore. I'm ready, Ben said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his head. If we're going to do this, we do it right. Clint leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with Ben's response. That's what I like to hear. I'm in this for the long haul, Ben. I want you to lead this. You've got vision, and you've got heart. But you're going to need more resources, more people. It's going to take a team effort. Ben nodded. I'll start putting together a plan. I'll talk to the team and get their input. But this is big. Clint smiled again. It is. And that's why I'm here. To make sure you have everything you need to make it happen. As Ben walked back to his office, his mind was racing. The weight of what Clint had just proposed felt immense. He had been leading the dealership through one challenge after another, but this was different. This was a shift in the very DNA of the business. This wasn't just about selling more cars or increasing profits. It was about creating something that would last for generations. He sat down at his desk, taking a deep breath. The future of the dealership, and his own future, was now tied to Clint's vision. There was no going back. He called Steve into his office, not bothering to wait. Steve arrived a few minutes later, looking curious. Ben motioned for him to sit. I just got out of a meeting with Clint, Ben began, his voice serious. And he wants us to take things to the next level. Steve raised an eyebrow. Next level? What are we talking about here? Ben leaned forward, his hands on the desk. Clint's talking about expanding, opening new locations, turning this dealership into something much bigger than it is now. He wants to create a brand, a movement. Steve's eyes widened. That's huge. What's the plan? Ben smiled, though there was a nervous edge to it. We're going to need to do a lot of groundwork. I'm going to start working on a plan, but we'll need to involve the entire team. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think we can do it. Steve nodded, a spark of excitement lighting up his face. I'm in. Let's do this. As Ben walked out of his office later that afternoon, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't alone. He had Clint's backing, Steve's loyalty, and a team that believed in the vision. They had come this far, and now it was time to shift gears and drive the dealership into the future. But there was still a nagging question in the back of Ben's mind. Was he truly ready for the risks that came with such a massive leap? Could he handle the pressure of leading this expansion, knowing that the stakes had never been higher? As the sun began to set on the dealership lot, Ben knew that only time would tell. But he wasn't about to back down now, not after everything they had accomplished. The weeks that followed Clint's bold proposition felt like a whirlwind. Ben was no longer just managing a single dealership. He was preparing for an expansion that would transform the entire business. The vision Clint Eastwood had laid out was taking shape, and the pressure to execute it perfectly was mounting. But Ben had never been one to shy away from challenges. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, and he was determined not to let it slip through his fingers. The first step was clear. They needed a detailed plan. Ben spent countless hours researching markets, talking to real estate agents, and analyzing competitor strategies. He knew that expanding too quickly could jeopardize everything they had worked for, so it was critical to be strategic. Ben called a meeting with Steve and the senior leadership team to discuss the expansion plans. They gathered in the conference room, each one of them looking both excited and apprehensive about the road ahead. I know this is a big step for us, Ben began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of responsibility. Clint believes in this vision, and I do too. But we have to do this carefully. We can't afford to rush into it. Steve nodded, his usual confidence tempered by the seriousness of the situation. We've got to make sure we're not stretching ourselves too thin. We need to pick the right locations, hire the right people, and, most importantly, maintain the culture we've built here. Ben looked around the room. Exactly. We've built something special here, and we can't let that get lost as we grow. This dealership is about more than just cars. It's about community. That's the brand we want to build. But we need to start thinking bigger. The team spent hours discussing potential locations for new dealerships. They looked at cities that had shown consistent growth, places where the market for high-end cars was thriving but where customer service was still lacking. They also talked about the kind of culture they wanted to foster, one that balanced the high standards of luxury with the warmth of personalized service. Ben was impressed by how everyone seemed to be on the same page. There was a shared understanding that they couldn't just mimic what had worked at the original dealership. They needed to innovate. The more they talked, the more energized Ben felt. This was it, the moment they had all been working toward. A few days later, Ben received a call from Clint. The conversation was brief but important. Ben, I've been thinking about your plan, Clint said. You're heading in the right direction, but I want to push you further. We've talked about expanding, but I want to make sure we're not just opening dealerships. I want to create an experience, something that's never been done before. Ben's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, Clint? Clint's voice was calm, but filled with authority. I want to blend the traditional car buying experience with something new. Think about it, cars are more than just vehicles. They're an extension of who we are. I want to create an environment where customers don't just buy a car, they buy into a lifestyle. Think about technology, luxury, personalized services that go beyond what we've seen in the industry. Ben felt the weight of Clint's words. This wasn't just about selling cars anymore. This was about changing the way people thought about car dealerships, about creating a brand that was synonymous with excellence in every aspect. I'll make it happen, Ben said, his voice resolute. We'll build an experience that's unlike anything anyone's ever seen. As the weeks passed, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Ben and his team started reaching out to architects, designers, and tech consultants to turn Clint's vision into reality. The concept was bold. Dealerships that didn't just sell cars but provided an immersive experience, with luxury lounges, virtual car customization, and interactive displays where customers could learn about the latest technology in the automotive world. But the path wasn't without its challenges. Ben had to navigate zoning laws, lease negotiations, and a host of logistical issues. There were moments when the pressure felt unbearable, and Ben would find himself staring out the window of his office, wondering if he was in over his head. But he pushed those doubts aside, reminded himself of why he started this journey, and kept moving forward. One evening, as Ben was working late at the dealership, Sarah stopped by to see him. She walked into his office, her eyes soft with concern. "How's it going?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Ben looked up, tired but with a spark in his eyes. "It's going. A lot of meetings, a lot of decisions to make. But we're getting closer. Clint's vision is taking shape." Sarah smiled. "I can see it in your face. You're excited." Ben leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I am, but I'm also nervous. This is a huge leap. There's so much on the line." "I know," Sarah said, walking over and sitting beside him. "But I also know you. You've always risen to the occasion, no matter how big the challenge. You're doing this because you believe in it. And you have an incredible team supporting you. You're not doing this alone." Ben smiled at her, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thanks, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you." She squeezed his hand. "You've got this, Ben. Just remember to take a breath every now and then. This isn't just about the dealership, it's about you too." Ben took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. He had always been so focused on the end goal that he sometimes forgot to appreciate the journey. But as he looked around the dealership, seeing the progress they had made and thinking about the road ahead, he realized she was right. This wasn't just about building a business. It was about creating something that could make a difference. The next morning, as Ben and his team finalized plans for the new dealership locations, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the vision they had was clear. They were no longer just selling cars. They were building a brand, a community, and a legacy. And with Clint's backing and the dedication of his team, Ben was ready to face whatever challenges came next. As the days turned into weeks, Ben's life became a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late-night planning sessions. The pressure to execute Clint's grand vision was palpable, but there was no turning back now. The team had embraced the idea of creating something revolutionary in the car dealership business, and the momentum was building. Each new task seemed like a new mountain to climb, from selecting the right architects to crafting a brand identity that would resonate with their target audience. Ben couldn't help but feel both the thrill of possibility and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about making money or increasing sales. This was about changing the way people experienced car buying forever. The first major hurdle was securing the locations for their new dealerships. They had scouted multiple cities, each with its own potential but also its challenges. After weeks of deliberation, Ben and Steve narrowed it down to 3 cities that fit their criteria: growth potential, an affluent customer base, and an underwhelming car buying experience that they could disrupt. Chicago, Denver, and Miami, Steve said, looking over the maps laid out on the table in Ben's office. These cities have strong markets for luxury cars, but there's a gap in the customer experience. We can make a real impact here. Ben nodded. Exactly. We'll need to make sure each location has its own character, but they all need to represent the same core values: quality, community, and innovation. We'll make it clear that we're not just selling cars, we're offering an experience. The next challenge was finding a team to match their vision. Ben knew that the success of these new locations would depend on the people running them. He needed managers who were not only skilled in sales, but also passionate about the brand they were building. It wasn't enough to hire just anyone. They needed leaders who understood the bigger picture. To help with the hiring process, Ben reached out to his network, bringing in top-tier talent from the automotive industry. The interviews were grueling, but each candidate was carefully vetted to ensure they aligned with the company's ethos. Ben didn't just want managers who could sell cars. He wanted people who could build relationships with customers and foster a sense of loyalty that would last long after the sale. One by one, the right people began to emerge. There was Emily, a dynamic manager with a background in luxury retail who had a knack for creating exceptional customer experiences. Then there was Jordan, a marketing expert with a deep understanding of how to craft narratives that resonated with the target demographic. Together, these new leaders would help shape the future of the dealership. Ben worked closely with his new team, leading them through the training process and ensuring they understood the core values of the company. He emphasized the importance of customer relationships and the role that each person would play in building a lasting legacy. The excitement was contagious, and for the first time in a while, Ben allowed himself to dream bigger than he ever had before. It wasn't just the internal team that was growing. Ben and Steve knew that in order to truly revolutionize the car buying experience, they had to focus on the customer's journey from start to finish. That meant rethinking the dealership floor entirely. The design concept Clint had suggested, luxury lounges, virtual car customization stations, and interactive displays, was in full swing. Ben had worked closely with an interior designer to create an environment that felt more like a high-end boutique than a traditional car dealership. They installed sleek leather seating, mood lighting, and state-of-the-art technology that allowed customers to explore car features and design their vehicles in real time. The goal was to make car shopping feel like an event, not a transaction. But even with all the technological advancements, Ben knew the key to their success would be personal connections. He didn't want to lose the family-like atmosphere that had made their original dealership so successful. In the new locations, every customer would be treated like a VIP. One afternoon, as Ben was finalizing some paperwork for the new locations, Sarah stopped by his office. She had a concerned look on her face, which immediately caught his attention. "What's going on?" Ben asked, putting down the paperwork. "I've been thinking," Sarah began, her voice hesitant. "You've been working around the clock. Are you sure you're not spreading yourself too thin? The last thing I want is for you to burn out." Ben sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew she was right. The stress of managing the expansion, keeping everything running smoothly, and balancing his personal life was taking its toll. But he couldn't stop now, not when they were so close to achieving their goals. "I know," Ben said, his voice weary, "but this is everything I've worked for. Clint's vision is incredible, and I don't want to let him down. I don't want to let the team down." Sarah sat down beside him, her eyes soft with understanding. "You've never been one to back down, Ben, but that doesn't mean you can't lean on the people around you. You don't have to carry the weight alone." Ben looked at her, grateful for her support. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't have to figure it all out alone," Sarah replied. "You have a team now. You've built something incredible, and they're ready to take on more. You just need to trust them and take care of yourself, too." Ben nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so long trying to do everything himself, but now he realized that he had a team who believed in him and his vision. It was time to let them step up, too. They weren't just employees. They were partners in this journey. "I'll try," Ben said, his tone a little lighter. "I know I can't do it all, but I'll do my best." As the months passed, the first of their new dealerships opened in Chicago. The grand opening was a huge success, with a line of customers eager to see the innovative new space. The interactive displays and luxury lounges were a hit, and the team's commitment to providing an unforgettable customer experience was evident in every interaction. Ben stood in the showroom, watching as customers explored the dealership, marveling at the sleek new designs and the cutting-edge technology. This was what he had envisioned all along. A dealership that wasn't just about cars, but about creating an experience that would stay with the customer long after they drove off the lot. The success of the Chicago dealership was just the beginning. Miami and Denver would soon follow, each location building on the lessons learned from the first. The foundation was set, and now it was time to watch the brand grow. But with success came new challenges. Ben couldn't afford to become complacent. The competition was fierce, and he knew that one wrong move could undo everything they had worked for. Yet, as he stood there watching the customers interact with his team, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They were doing it. They were making Clint's vision a reality, and Ben was ready for whatever came next. The success of the Chicago dealership had exceeded all expectations. Ben was riding high on the feeling of accomplishment, the buzz from the grand opening still echoing in his mind. But as the days wore on, he could feel the growing pains. There was always something new to tackle, some challenge on the horizon that seemed to demand more energy, more focus. But nothing prepared him for the unexpected call he received one Tuesday afternoon. It was Clint. His voice sounded unusually serious, the kind of tone that Ben recognized immediately. "Ben, we've got a situation," Clint said, his voice steady but heavy. Ben's heart skipped a beat. "What's happened?" "I just got a call from one of our suppliers. It seems there's been a mix-up with some of the luxury models we've ordered for the new dealerships. The shipments were delayed by several months." Ben's stomach sank. "How is that possible? We're counting on those cars to stock the new locations. We can't afford delays now, not with Miami and Denver coming up." "I know. We've got to handle this carefully. The last thing we want is to lose customer confidence over something like this," Clint said. "You need to figure out a solution, and fast. Let's talk tonight. I'm flying in for a meeting." That evening, Ben sat in his office, staring at the details Clint had sent over. The mix-up wasn't just a minor glitch, it was a full-on crisis. They had committed to high-end models for their customers, and without them, their dealerships wouldn't be able to live up to the expectations Clint had set. The thought of disappointing Clint weighed heavily on Ben. He had come so far, and now, with everything hanging in the balance, it felt like a betrayal of all the hard work that had been put in. By the time Clint arrived, Ben had already been brainstorming potential solutions. They could try to source the cars from other suppliers, but that would take time. They could offer temporary models, but would customers settle for that? The brand they were building was all about luxury and exclusivity. Would customers forgive them if they didn't get exactly what they were promised? When Clint walked into the office, Ben was already standing, papers spread out in front of him. "Ben," Clint said, his expression unreadable, "I know this isn't ideal, but we can't afford to panic. This is a test, and how we handle it will define us. If we can come out of this with our reputation intact, we'll be stronger for it." Ben met Clint's gaze, his mind racing. "I know, but I feel like we're on the edge. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart." Clint chuckled, the familiar calmness in his voice reassuring Ben. "That's the beauty of this business. It's unpredictable, but if you keep your focus, you can adapt. Remember what we're building here. It's not just about the cars, it's about the experience. Let's use this moment to show our customers just how committed we are to giving them the best." The next few days were a whirlwind. Ben spent hours on the phone, calling every possible connection he had in the industry, trying to secure the missing vehicles. He and Steve worked tirelessly to come up with a marketing strategy that would reassure customers and prevent the situation from tarnishing their reputation. "I think we should focus on the experience itself," Steve suggested during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "Instead of just highlighting the models, let's emphasize the luxury experience we're offering. We can provide exclusive test drives, offer private consultations with experts, and show them what it means to be part of our community." Ben nodded, the idea taking root. "I like that. We need to create an atmosphere of exclusivity, something that says, yes, the models are delayed, but what you're getting is worth the wait." With the plan in motion, Ben and his team sprang into action. They worked with the marketing department to launch a campaign that focused on the value of the experience rather than just the cars themselves. They created a VIP service for customers, offering private showings of the cars when they arrived and allowing them to customize their vehicles in ways that weren't available at other dealerships. The week leading up to the grand opening of the Denver location was tense. Ben knew that the pressure was mounting with every passing day. The new marketing strategy was gaining traction, but there were still doubts. The delay in the car shipments was undeniable. Could they pull it off? Could they prove that their brand wasn't just about the cars, but about creating a luxury experience? Then came a breakthrough. One of their suppliers reached out with a surprise solution. It seemed that a different shipment of luxury cars, not part of their original order but in high demand, had just been made available. These cars weren't the exact models they had initially planned for, but they were similar, and in some cases, even better. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a solution nonetheless. Ben didn't hesitate. He immediately called Clint with the news. "I think we've got it," Ben said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and excitement. "We've secured the cars. They're not exactly what we planned, but they're close. We can offer them to our customers and maintain the exclusivity factor." Clint's voice crackled with approval. "Good work, Ben. I knew you'd find a way. Now, let's make sure we handle this the right way." Ben breathed a sigh of relief. The crisis was far from over, but they had bought themselves some time. The next few days would be crucial. They needed to get the cars into their dealerships, update their marketing materials, and prepare their teams to offer the best customer experience possible. When the grand opening in Denver arrived, Ben felt a sense of anticipation in the air. This was it, the moment they would either rise above the challenge or fall short of the expectations they had set. The doors opened, and customers flooded in, eager to see the new cars. Ben watched as the team navigated the showroom, providing personalized attention to each visitor. The customers seemed pleased with the temporary models, and the exclusive, high-end experiences they had designed were a hit. It wasn't the flawless opening they had originally hoped for, but it was a resounding success. After the event, Ben stood outside the dealership, staring at the night sky. He took a deep breath, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had faced their first major test, and not only had they survived, but they had come out stronger. This was only the beginning, he whispered to himself, the words full of conviction. In that moment, Ben realized that the road ahead would never be easy. There would be more obstacles, more challenges, and more moments where the future seemed uncertain. But if there was one thing he had learned from Clint and this experience, it was that resilience and adaptability were the keys to success. And with that knowledge, he was ready for whatever came next. The tension of the last few weeks slowly began to fade as the team settled into their rhythm. With the Denver location now open and the crisis behind them, Ben finally had a moment to breathe. The sleepless nights, the endless meetings, the constant pressure, all of it seemed to dissipate, if only for a brief moment. But that moment was fleeting. The next phase of their journey was already on the horizon, and Ben knew they couldn't afford to slow down. Miami was next, and it was going to be their most ambitious project yet. The stakes had never been higher. This location was going to serve as the flagship store, the place that would truly set them apart in the industry. They needed it to be flawless. Ben stood in the center of the Miami showroom, the space still empty, with only blueprints and sketches scattered across the floor. The vision was clear. It had to be grand, it had to be revolutionary, and it had to reflect everything they had learned so far. "I want this to feel like stepping into a different world," Ben said to the architects and designers gathered around him. "I don't just want a dealership, I want an experience. Something that feels like a destination, not just a stop on the way to buying a car." Clint's influence was everywhere, but it was Ben's leadership that was taking this vision to the next level. They had already decided on a sleek, futuristic aesthetic for the space: high ceilings, glass walls, interactive displays, and a customer lounge that could double as a gallery. They would host exclusive events, provide private consultations, and introduce state-of-the-art technology that would make buying a car feel like an adventure. The pressure to get everything right was immense. With Clint's reputation, and their own, on the line, the team worked tirelessly around the clock, ensuring every detail was perfect. But despite the mounting pressure, there was a palpable sense of excitement that ran through the group. Everyone was fully invested in the success of the Miami location. It wasn't just about selling cars. It was about creating something that had never been done before. In the midst of the preparations, Ben took a moment to reflect. He thought about the early days when Clint had first walked into his dealership, the awkwardness of their initial meeting, and the chaos that had followed. He never could have imagined how much his life would change in such a short time. The stakes were higher now. Every decision, every move he made, carried weight. But he wasn't the same person he had been months ago. He had grown in ways he never anticipated. And most importantly, he was starting to believe in himself the way Clint believed in him. But as the days passed and the grand opening of the Miami location approached, Ben felt the familiar pang of doubt creeping in. Was he doing enough? Was he pushing the team too hard? Were they ready for the next big leap? The night before the opening, Ben found himself standing alone in the showroom. The floor was still being polished, the lights still being tested. The space was alive with energy, but it felt surreal. The dream had come so far. Yet now it was about to be tested in ways that no one could predict. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. He turned to see Clint standing in the doorway, his hands tucked in his pockets. "You okay?" Clint asked, his voice calm and knowing. Ben shrugged, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm just wondering if I'm ready for this. It's one thing to have a vision, but another to make it a reality. What if we fall short?" Clint chuckled and walked into the showroom, looking around at the nearly finished space. "You've already built something incredible, Ben. This store? It's everything we talked about and more. This isn't about falling short. It's about stepping up to the challenge and seeing it through." Ben nodded, absorbing Clint's words. "You know," Clint continued, "when I first started, I was terrified too. I had no idea if people would trust me, if they would buy into the vision. But that fear? That's what pushes you forward. It's not about eliminating fear. It's about learning to work with it." Ben let out a deep breath. "I get it. I've been so focused on the details, on making sure everything is perfect. But maybe it's about showing people we're real, that we're just as committed as they are. If they see that, maybe that's enough." "Exactly," Clint said, his voice full of conviction. "You're not just selling cars. You're selling an experience, a dream. And dreams? They don't come with guarantees. But if you keep pushing, keep innovating, people will follow. You've already proven you can make it happen. This is just the next step." The grand opening was nothing short of spectacular. As customers walked through the doors of the Miami dealership, they were immediately struck by the atmosphere. The space was vibrant, dynamic, and undeniably luxurious. It felt like stepping into the future, a place where innovation and comfort met in perfect harmony. Ben watched as customers were welcomed into the interactive showroom, where they could customize their cars using virtual reality, explore cutting-edge features on digital screens, and relax in plush lounges while sipping on artisanal coffee. The dealership had become more than a place to buy a car. It had become a destination. But the real magic happened when Ben observed the faces of the customers. It wasn't just about the cars. It was about the feeling they got when they walked through the doors. There was a sense of excitement, of possibility, in the air. It was clear that Ben had succeeded in creating an experience, not just a transaction. By the end of the day, the dealership had sold more cars than they had anticipated. The buzz around the event was unlike anything Ben had ever seen. It wasn't just a successful opening. It was a statement. They weren't just changing the way people bought cars. They were reshaping the entire industry. As Ben stood there, watching the team celebrate, Clint came up to him, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Ben. You really did it." Ben smiled back, a sense of pride swelling inside him. "We did it, Clint. This is just the beginning." The months following the grand opening of the Miami dealership passed in a whirlwind. The success of the location had far exceeded everyone's expectations, and the buzz from the media and customers alike only seemed to intensify with each passing day. Ben's name was becoming synonymous with innovation and luxury in the automotive industry. It felt like every step he took was leading him to the top. But with success came new challenges, new pressures that Ben had never fully anticipated. As the company expanded, so did his responsibilities. He was no longer just managing a single dealership. He was overseeing a growing network, a brand that was beginning to take on a life of its own. And that weight of leadership, the constant balancing act between strategy, innovation, and personal sacrifice, was starting to take its toll. One late evening, Ben sat at his desk, his eyes scanning a series of reports. The numbers were good, outstanding, even, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been a week since the Miami opening, and while the excitement was still palpable, Ben couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Something was off. He hadn't had a moment to himself in weeks. He had been so caught up in the success of the business that he had neglected the personal side of his life. He hadn't called his parents in over a month. He hadn't gone out with his friends since before the Miami event. And he hadn't seen Emily in days. The woman who had always been there for him, the woman he loved, was now a distant memory in the whirlwind of his career. Ben rubbed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. It wasn't just the workload. It was the constant expectation to perform, to keep pushing. Clint had taught him how to take risks, how to keep moving forward, but no one had told him how to slow down. No one had prepared him for the loneliness that came with being at the top. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Ben? It was Steve, his trusted right-hand man, and the only person who seemed to truly understand what Ben was going through. Can we talk for a minute? Ben waved him in, forcing a smile. Yeah, sure. What's up? Steve took a seat across from him, his expression serious. I can see what's going on, man. You're burning out. Ben chuckled, but it was a hollow laugh. I'm fine, Steve. Just a lot on my plate right now. I know, Steve replied, leaning forward, but you can't keep doing this. You're running yourself into the ground. The business is thriving, but if you're not careful, you'll lose the very thing that made it great in the first place, your passion. You've been living and breathing this company 24/7, but at what cost? Ben stared at the papers in front of him, the truth of Steve's words hitting him harder than he expected. What do you mean? I mean you've got to take a step back, Steve continued. You've done incredible things, but you can't do it all. You need to start delegating more. You need to take care of yourself. Your work is important, but so are you. Ben felt a knot form in his stomach. Steve was right. His personal life had taken a back seat to his career. And now, as his responsibilities continued to grow, he was starting to lose touch with everything that mattered outside the business. I don't know how to stop, Ben admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Every time I think I'm on top of things, something else comes up. It's like I'm always chasing the next thing, and I can't seem to catch up. Steve nodded, his gaze understanding. I get it, but you're not in this alone. You've got a team. You've got Clint. And most importantly, you've got Emily. You need to make sure you're there for the people who matter, too. Ben sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on Steve's words. He realized that, despite all the success and accolades, he had neglected the very people who had supported him along the way. The ones who had always believed in him, even when he hadn't fully believed in himself. He picked up his phone and dialed Emily's number. It rang a few times before she picked up. Ben? Her voice was soft but distant. Everything okay? Emily, Ben said, his voice filled with sincerity. I've been an idiot. I've been so focused on work that I've lost sight of what's really important. I'm sorry. Can we talk? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I've been worried about you, Ben, but I get it. You've got big dreams, and you've been working hard to make them come true. But you can't do it all alone. I know, Ben replied, the weight of her words sinking in, and I don't want to do it alone. I just got caught up in everything, and I forgot to make time for us. Emily's voice softened. I'm here, Ben, but you need to make time for me, too. I want to be part of this journey with you, not just a distant spectator. Ben smiled, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in weeks. I will. I promise. You mean more to me than any deal, any car, any dealership. I won't make that mistake again. The next morning, Ben made a decision. He was going to take control of his life again. Not just his business, but his relationships, his well-being, and his happiness. He couldn't keep running on empty. He called Clint and Steve and let them know he was going to step back a little. He was still committed to the company, but he needed to find a balance. They understood. Clint, especially, had always emphasized the importance of taking time for the people who mattered. "I'm proud of you, Ben," Clint said when they spoke. "It takes guts to admit when you need a break. And remember, this business doesn't have to be a one-man show. It's about building something together." Ben spent the following days reconnecting with Emily, his family, and his friends. He made sure to check in with his team, but he also allowed himself the space to recharge. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew that taking care of himself was just as important as taking care of the business. And as he did, he realized something profound. Leadership wasn't just about making the tough calls or steering the ship through the storm. It was about knowing when to step back, to look at the bigger picture, and to make sure the people you loved, and who loved you, were right there beside you. As Ben walked into the office the following Monday, refreshed and ready to face the challenges ahead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. True success wasn't measured by how much you achieved. It was measured by how well you balanced everything that mattered. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ben's office, casting a golden glow over the sleek, modern furniture. The city of Miami was alive and bustling outside, but inside, the atmosphere was calm, almost serene. For the first time in a long while, Ben felt at peace. It had been several months since he had made the decision to take a step back, to find balance, and to reconnect with what truly mattered. His relationship with Emily had never been stronger, and his relationship with the team had deepened. Even the pressure of overseeing a growing company didn't feel as overwhelming anymore. He had learned to delegate more, to trust others, and to let go of the need to control every little detail. But despite the tranquility he had found, the business was still evolving. New challenges always seemed to appear on the horizon, and Ben knew that this next challenge would be unlike any other. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying the market, meeting with investors, and working with Clint to refine their vision. Miami had been a great success, but now it was time to scale, time to make their mark in an entirely new way. They were about to enter the electric vehicle market. "Ben," Clint said, walking into Ben's office with a serious look on his face. "We need to talk." Ben glanced up from his laptop, his expression shifting to one of concern. "What's going on?" Clint pulled up a chair and sat down, folding his hands. "We've got a competitor entering the electric vehicle space, and they're serious. They're backed by a huge tech company, and they've already started making moves in the industry. They've got the kind of capital we don't have right now." Ben felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a threat. The electric vehicle market was booming, and it was only going to get more competitive. For a moment, he thought about everything they had built, everything they had worked for, and the weight of that success hung heavily in the air. "Do we have the resources to compete with them?" Ben asked, his voice steady, though his mind raced with possibilities. Clint nodded slowly. "We've got the vision, the customer base, and the brand. What we need is to get ahead of the curve. We've been talking about entering the EV market for a while, but now it's not a choice anymore. It's a necessity. If we wait too long, we risk falling behind." Ben leaned back in his chair, considering Clint's words. This was the moment. The company was poised for growth, but it was also teetering on the edge of uncertainty. The electric vehicle market was about to change everything. There was no turning back. Over the next few weeks, Ben and Clint worked tirelessly to develop a plan. They met with engineers, designers, and market analysts, laying the groundwork for their first electric vehicle. The car would be everything they had built their brand on: cutting-edge, luxurious, and unlike anything else on the market. It would appeal to the same audience they had cultivated, but it would also attract a new generation of environmentally conscious buyers. Ben threw himself into the project with renewed vigor. He was in the showroom more than ever, meeting with potential partners, overseeing design sketches, and testing prototypes. The excitement was palpable, and for the first time in months, Ben felt the rush of working on something big. It wasn't just about keeping the company afloat. It was about leading the charge into a new era. But as the days passed, Ben began to feel the familiar pressure creeping in. Every decision seemed to carry more weight. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just a new car. It was the future of the company. Every misstep could send them tumbling. He could feel the tension in the air. The stakes had never been higher. The competition was fierce, and the industry was changing faster than anyone could predict. One late evening, As Ben sat alone in his office, reviewing the final specifications for the electric vehicle, he received a call from Emily. She had been his anchor throughout this entire journey, and he could tell from her voice that she had sensed his unease. "You've been quiet tonight," she said gently. "How's everything going?" Ben let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair. "It's going, but I'm starting to feel the weight of it all, Emily. This is the biggest move we've ever made. If we get this wrong—" "You won't," Emily interrupted softly. "I know how hard you're working, and I know how much this means to you. But you don't have to carry it all by yourself. You've got a team, and you've got Clint. You've been through so much already. You'll make it through this, too." Her words, simple yet profound, reminded Ben of something he had almost forgotten. He wasn't alone. He had built a team around him, a team that believed in the vision and was committed to making it happen. He had Clint, his mentor and partner. And most importantly, he had Emily, who had always been there to remind him that he was human, not a machine. The launch of their electric vehicle was nothing short of spectacular. Ben and Clint stood side by side, watching as the first model rolled off the production line. The car was sleek, futuristic, and incredibly well received by critics and consumers alike. The media coverage was glowing, and customers lined up to test drive the vehicle. The competition was fierce, but the reaction to their car confirmed one thing. They had made the right decision. They weren't just keeping up with the industry, they were shaping it. As the first wave of electric vehicles hit the market, Ben stood in the showroom, watching the cars being delivered to customers. The pride he felt in that moment was indescribable. It wasn't just the success of the car. It was the culmination of everything they had worked for, everything they had built, and everything they had believed in. A few weeks later, Ben found himself back at his desk, reflecting on the journey. The company was stronger than ever, and the electric vehicle launch had been a huge success. They had entered a new era, one that was filled with even more possibilities. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had proven they could adapt and innovate, even in the face of fierce competition. Ben took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly content. He had learned a lot in the past year, not just about business, but about life, leadership, and what it meant to truly find balance. He had come a long way since the first time he had met Clint. The road ahead would no doubt be challenging, but Ben was ready. With his team by his side, his passion renewed, and the support of the people who mattered most, there was no limit to what they could achieve. Ben's story had come full circle. He had gone from managing a small dealership to leading a major company at the forefront of innovation. But his journey wasn't just about success in business. It was about finding balance, trusting in the people around him, and realizing that true leadership was about more than making tough decisions. It was about supporting those who believed in the vision and knowing when to let go and let others lead. As Ben looked out the window of his office one last time, he knew the future was bright. The world was changing, and he was ready to change with it. But no matter how far they went, no matter how high they climbed, he would always remember the lessons he had learned along the way. And with Clint by his side, there was no telling how far they could go. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?